Hello everyone, and welcome to my Ultimate Mist of Pandaria Leveling Guide, where I'll cover all the different classes, their specializations, talents and glyphs, and there's also a timeline so you can easily skip to whatever you're looking for. The first class I'll be covering is the Mage. At level 10, we can choose our specialization. You can choose between Frost, Fire and Arcane, but because we don't really have many ways to do AoE damage and no Blizzard at low level, then you shouldn't expect to be killing many targets at the same time. In other words, at low level, all of these specializations will mainly just focus on killing one target at a time. So let's try to compare these at level 10 to figure out what will be the best way to level. Here I'm testing Fire, where I'll mainly just use my Pyroblast and of course also Fire Blast to finish them off. But the downside is that at low level and even with heirloom items, we don't have a lot of crit. Therefore, we also don't get many procs where we can cast an instant Pyroblast, and this is the downside to this specialization at low level. So is Arcane any better? Well, it's so easy to play, and you're basically just spamming your Arcane Blast over and over and one-shotting most enemies out there. In my opinion, it's also the best specialization at low level because we are dealing such a high amount of damage compared to Fire, but also Frost. Talking about Frost, let's see this in action. The benefit is that you will have a pet at level 10 where you can use your freeze to have better control, and your pet is also doing a decent amount of damage at low level, but it is getting worse as we are leveling up. However, at level 16 we will unlock the passive Shatter that makes Frost so much better. And of course also Ice Lance at level 22 and Fingers of Frost at level 24. And all of a sudden, Frost are actually doing a lot better. Just remember to always use your pet's freeze so you proc those Fingers of Frost to one-shot most enemies with your Ice Lance. The only downside is that freeze also has a rather long cooldown, and this is where you'll benefit more from playing Arcane because you're constantly dealing a high amount of damage. And this is what I like way more, instead of having to wait for important cooldowns before you will also be dealing a high amount of damage. And in my opinion, it is the most fun, but also the most efficient way to level up at low level, because we constantly have something to press to deal a high amount of damage. And for those of you wondering, no, Fire are not any good at this level. In a moment I will also talk about the different talents, but first I would also like to highlight that the quickest way from 1 to 90 is by questing. Therefore I'm always using a questing add-on whenever I'm leveling up a character, and the one I'm using right here I will also leave in the description below this video. The link will redirect you to the page where you can try out the free version and also get the full version that works all the way up to max level. So what talents am I using? Well, the first you can choose at level 15, but my overall talent tree mainly looks like this. There's no doubt Ice Flows is your best pick at level 15. Being able to run and cast spells is absolutely insane for leveling, especially at low level when you don't have many spells. As you can see here, at 20 seconds recharge time, and I'm now just able to run between these creatures and finish them off. The reason why I don't like Blazing Speed is because most enemies won't be able to reach you before you finish them off anyway, so this is pretty much useless. And Presence of Mind, 1.5 minutes cooldown. Yeah, you will be able to cast an instant spell, but because this is also a long cooldown, it's not really beneficial. Sometimes I pick Ice Barrier, basically because of the low cooldown, and it's lasting for 1 minute. In other words, I can have this active at any given time as long as I'm not taking too much damage. Flame Glow is a passive, so you don't really have to activate anything. You're just taking a lower amount of damage at any given time. The last option would also require you to always use the spell just before you're taking a lot of damage, and this is something I dislike. So either go for the passive or Ice Barrier. In most situations I would honestly choose Ice Barrier because I can keep this up all the time and never really take any damage. Frostjaw is in my opinion a talent mainly just for PvP, as it's only beneficial when you're fighting one specific target, and this is usually not the case when leveling a mage. Ice Ward, a 20 seconds cooldown as well, but this will affect every single enemy in your area. So you can for example use your Ice Lance on all these targets, and remember it's also an instant cast. This is not the same case with Ring of Frost, but this cooldown is definitely not bad either, as you can for example CC many targets in dungeons, and your Ice Lance will also be doing a lot of damage as those targets are frozen. How about at level 60? Cold Snap is an insane choice. It's healing you and also resetting the cooldown of many important spells, so this is a must have. The other option, yeah, this is great if you're dropping low and you're not really paying attention to your health, as you can then be healed for a high amount and use your ice block to prevent the damage over time. The last option isn't great, as we already have invisibility. Yeah, it is a better one, but you're not really benefiting much compared to choosing Cold Snap here. At 75 we can choose Nether Tempest, but sadly it doesn't do a high amount of damage, even though it is hitting many targets. Living Bomb isn't really beneficial either, at least not if you're killing the enemies quicker than the explosion. And the explosion is what does the huge amount of AoE damage, so if you end up killing them too quickly, it won't be dealing any AoE damage. This is where Frost Bomb is a lot better, a short cooldown, a quick cast time, and it's also exploding in next to no time, dealing a high amount of damage to that specific target and also nearby creatures. And these are the reasons for why I choose each individual talent. Next up, my different glyphs, starting with the major ones. Evocation is a must-have, and it is mandatory, as you will now be able to heal yourself when you're also regening mana at the same time. The second one, well, it all depends on your specialization, as fire, combustion is for example pretty decent. But no matter your specialization, you could also go for Glyph of Blink, so you're traveling even further. Or another option, to have 2 charges, but then you won't be able to free yourself from stuns and roots when using Blink. As Frost, Cone of Cold can be decent to do AoE damage, but also when leveling as Arcane, as you usually don't have many ways to deal AoE damage. Just remember to also use your Frost Nova, so you have a higher chance of critting those targets. Or you could go for Arcane Explosion to increase the range, or maybe even both of these, so you're just an AoE monster. As Arcane, I also like Glyph of Slow, so when I'm using Arcane Blast, I will also be applying my slow instead of manually having to use the spell. As Fire, you will also benefit from Inferno Blast, so this is a great choice as well. But yeah, pick whatever you prefer. This is also the same case with minor glyphs beside one of these, as it's mandatory. When you're using your teleport or portal, you will also increase your movement speed for 1 minute. The rest are basically just cosmetic, so choose whatever you like. Next up, comparing leveling at 60 and then 85. Once again, starting with fire. And now we have way more crit. In other words, also being able to proc our instant pump power blast so much often. And this makes the specialization a lot more fun, as we can also run, use our Scorch, and I never really take any damage, as I can just outrun these targets. But I'm still having the same problem like I had at level 10. If I don't have enough crit, well, then it doesn't happen as often, and then all of a sudden my single target damage isn't really that great. And I don't really want to rely on luck. No, I would much rather like to have steady damage. This is where Frost comes in play. Yeah, you'll of course be able to shatter those enemies and also one-shot them. But when you don't have those roots, well, then you're still dealing a decent amount of damage. Also because your pet is assisting you. So as you can see here, my Frostbolt are dealing high amount of damage. I have a high chance to proc my Fingers of Frost, and when it happens, I'm also one-shotting most of these with my Ice Lance. And it is a fun specialization to level at. Your mobility is way better, your survivability isn't bad either, and it's just proccing Fingers of Frost left and right. What I also like is that I can easily stack many creatures, use my Nova or Freeze, get my procs, and then just blast those down. I could of course also get close and use my Cone of Cold, but using Ice Lance is just amazing damage, and in my opinion it is better compared to leveling as Fire in Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King and Cataclysm content. But what about Arcane? Is this still performing as great like it did at lower levels? Definitely. It is still the same rotation as well, basically just using your Arcane Blast and missiles whenever they proc. I don't use Arcane Barrage that often because it's also removing my stacks. If I'm doing this, well, then it's also because my debuff is about to run out and I can't cast a new blast. This is where I would then be using my Arcane Barrage. Just like Frost, then you will also benefit from pulling many targets at the same time. You could for example use Ring of Frost, use your Cone of Cold, and then just spam your Arcane Explosion as it's dealing a high amount of AoE damage. But if I need to compare Frost and Arcane, I feel like there isn't a huge difference because both of them are doing pretty damn amazing compared to Fire. What about our armors? When leveling as Fire and Frost, I like to use Molten Armor, so I also increase my critical strike. For more mana efficiency, I like to use Mage Armor. This is especially useful when you're leveling as Arcane. But I never really use my Frost Armor when Mage Armor and Molten Armor has been unlocked. So what is the best specialization when leveling from 85 to 90 in Mist of Pandaria zones? Arcane has huge potential burst when fighting one creature at a time. Just like you saw right there. You're always proccing something and you're dealing such a high amount of damage with your Frost Bomb, and this is why I like this specialization a lot. What about AoE? I always pull with my Blizzard, as this is a great way to be hitting all the targets, also when they're for example neutral. What I do next is to use an Ice Block to stack them together perfectly, a Nova, and then I apply my Frost Bomb so it starts ticking. Then I use a Ring of Frost, but you could also just Cone of Cold. For an even bigger burst, you could also activate Cold Snap for a second Nova and Cone of Cold. Or get some distance, use a Blizzard, or apply another Frost Bomb. No matter what you do, you will end up being just fine. When I tested Fire, I immediately noticed I were also doing next to no damage, at least if we compared it to Arcane, and I felt like it wasn't fun just to kill one target at a time. How about our AoE damage? Is this good? Well, I really like this rotation. It is close to the same as Arcane, but now I also have Dragon Breath for an additional AoE damage, but also stun effect. This gives me time to change position, use another Frost Bomb, or simply just wait for a second Cone of Cold. But remember, we cannot always just do huge AoE pulls, also because there will be competition, which is why Arcane is going to be quicker. But is it going to be quicker than Frost? The benefit of playing Frost is that you have a second freeze. In other words, your mobility will be so much better, and in most cases you will end up taking next to no damage when you're doing pulls like this. What's also important to mention is that Frost were outperforming Arcane and Fire AoE damage, and I were able to kill these quicker but also more safe. Single target wise, if we're for example not getting our lucky procs, Arcane are doing a bit better. But let's be real, often you will be able to deal with more than one at the same time, and this is where Frost are all of a sudden also doing better, because when you use your freeze you're also getting 2 fingers of Frost procs, and here you'll basically just be outcompeting the Arcane. So if I could only choose one specialization for leveling in Mist of Pandaria, it would probably be Frost. But it also comes down to your plans at max level. If you would for example like to play Arcane or Fire when you're going to raid, then I would probably level from 85 to 90 as that specialization, so you get used to the spells and rotations. Next up, the Hunter. When I reach level 10, I always choose to level as Beast Mastery, because you're doing an insane amount of damage without next to no gear, where Marksman and Survival are actually pretty gear dependent. But this is not the same case as Beast Mastery, as your pet will be doing most damage, or well, your kill command will. Like you can see in this case, my pet is taking care of everything. Sometimes I might have to do 1 or 2 auto shots, but I basically just have to focus on running to the next destination. So what specialization am I using for my pet? Mainly Ferocity, as it's doing the best damage. But if I'm doing a very difficult quest, for example an elite that requires 2 or 3 people, then I swap to Tenacity to make my pet a lot more tanky, and sometimes I will therefore also be able to solo these quests. The last specialization is not recommended, as this is mainly for PvP. For those specific reasons I'm mainly choosing Ferocity, but also because we get an insane cooldown where we can instantly revive our pet with full health. In a moment I'll show my talent and glyphs tree and also compare the different specializations at higher levels. But before I do this, the best way to level a hunter is going to be by questing. And whenever I'm questing, I'm always using a leveling guide. The one I'm using right here I will also leave in the description below this video, where you can use the redirect link to download and test it out for free, or get the full version that works all the way up to max level. Alright, so the moment you reach level 15, you can choose your very first talent. But what should you choose? This is my overall talent tree that I'm using when I'm leveling. At level 15, I always choose Post Haste. The main reason is because after using Disengage, my movement speed is also increased by 60% for 8 seconds. This is so insane when you're just running around, kiting, or simply going from one creature to another. You send in your pet and then you start shooting at the next enemy. I don't like narrow escape, as you're not pulling many enemies at low level, so this is not beneficial. At the same time, this is mainly a PvP talent. I don't like the last option either, as you as of right now don't have the Terrans. And disengage, yeah, a lower cooldown can be nice, but you're not getting the huge movement speed increasement, which is insane when you don't have your mount. At level 30, you can unlock a 3-second stun, but it also has a 1-minute cooldown. It's definitely not bad, but it's not what I'm usually choosing. Revenge Sting is mainly for PvP, because you already have your traps, so you don't really need to CC a target for 30 seconds in the open world. What I prefer about Blinding Shot is that if you accidentally pull too many enemies, you can easily get away, but later on you will also start dealing with more enemies at the same time, and this is where rooting these in place becomes super handy so they don't reach you. You can also combine this together with your trap, so first you root them in place, and after this root they're now also being slowed. Absolutely insane for when you start cleaving later on. At level 45, this is definitely a decent choice, as you're instantly being healed for 30% and your pet 100. The downside is that it has a 2 minutes cooldown, but it's way better compared to this aspect, as the aspect will not reduce the damage taken by your pet, so if you're leveling as BM, it won't really affect you in any positive way, also because you're not getting any better heals. Why I prefer Spirit Bond is because it's a passive, and it's healing you and your pet for 3% of your total health every 2 seconds, ensuring you and your pet almost being at full health all the time. In other words, you can continue to kill over and over without having a lot of downtime where you need to eat food or use bandages or heal your pet. At level 60, there's two really decent choices. The first one here, yet another passive, and I honestly like this a lot, especially later on when I start using multi-shot and arcane shots a lot more frequently. Why I don't like Dire Beast is because this is mainly a cooldown for single target kills, and I end up killing single target creatures fast anyway, so it's not that useful. Also because at level 60, or well at least when I reach level 70, I will also start dealing with more targets at the same time when I swap to survival and start focusing on cleaving. A talent like this is way better, as I can now control when I would like to burst, and it only has a 30 seconds cooldown, so you can use it all the time. Especially when you also start doing AoE pulls, because it will take time for you to gather them all together, and then this cooldown will be ready, so you can spam your multi-shots. When we reach level 75, we can choose a Murder of Crows, but this has a 2 minutes cooldown, it costs 60 focus, and it's mainly just for single target damaging. A talent like Blink Strikes is way better. It will passively increase the damage done by your pet's basic attacks by 50%, and your pet can now also teleport behind your target. So it's easy for your pet to reach it and also keep up with your movement speed. Lynx Rush also has a high cooldown, but the benefit over a Murder of Crows is if you're fighting many targets, it will also be spreading the bleed to many of those. However, the damage isn't that high, which is why Blink Strike is in my opinion better, as it increases my pet damage all the time, being able to keep up with me a lot easier, and it's a passive. With my talent tree now being covered, let's move on to my glyph tree. Being able to travel around quicker is gonna be important if you wish to level up more efficiently, which is why I'm choosing Glyph of Pathfinding. To ensure my pet always having a high amount of health and aggro, I'm using Glyph of Mending and Misdirection. However, if there's a difficult area you would like to skip, you can always use Glyph of Camouflage. Glyph of Fetch is a must-have, as you can now use your pet to loot, and because there's also been introduced AoE looting in Mist of Pandaria, it just makes everything a lot better. I also like to get this minor glyph, so if I'm being hit, I'm not being dazed, there's just going to be a short cooldown on my aspect of Cheetah. And the last one I usually choose is Glyph of Revive Pet. Leveling a hunter is so easy, especially in the beginning, and also when you move into Burning Crusade content. Here I'm still leveling as Beast Mastery, and I'm just using Kill Command and a couple of arcane shots. It's not like you can't level as Marksman, it's just very slow compared to the two other specializations. But when we reach level 68, a new passive unlocks that makes survival a lot better. This is Serpent Spread, so when you use your multi-shot, it will also apply Serpent Sting. So what I tend to do is to respec into survival at level 68 just before I move into Wrath of the Lich King content. But don't worry, you could just stay BM as well, because they're still performing really great. Just like you could have leveled a survival from level 10, because survival are also doing good before you get this passive. What I also tend to do at level 68 is to swap my pet specialization into being more tanky now that I'm not playing BM. With all of this being said, it's not like you always have to try to pull 4 or 5 enemies at the same time and then use your multi-shot, because it's not going to be a possibility at all the different locations. But don't worry, you can still easily kill targets one by one because you're doing massive damage. Just make sure to always use your ice traps so you're also proccing lock and load. This will make you able to use your explosive shot 2 times in a row without triggering no cooldown or spending any focus. Lock and load is the reason why this specialization is also useful for leveling prior to reaching level 68, so it's not like you are forced to play as BM at low level. How about when we reach level 85 and move into Mist of Pandaria zones? Are this specialization still any good? As you can see here, 1 vs 1, I'm not doing bad, but it's not instant kills. However, survival is what you will mainly be using at max level, at least in phase 1 and 2, because it's doing the best DPS compared to BM and MM. What I like a lot about survival hunter leveling in Mist of Pandaria zones is that the creatures are also stacked together, so it's easy for you to just pull all of them by using a multi-shot. And therefore you will also be leveling up super quickly because you're being rewarded with a ton of experience after killing all of these. And it will be done in next to no time, instead of just killing one enemy at a time. Beast Mastery are also doing really good when it comes to killing many at the same time, because your pet are super tanky, so you're not really pulling any aggro and it's not really dying. Therefore you can also do something like this. But I feel like it's more cooldown dependent, or well, not killing the creatures as quickly, because you have to wait for more cooldowns before you can do a burst like this again. Another huge downside is that if you level like this all the way up to 90, so as the specialization, well then at max level you're not really doing any great DPS. Sorry to say, but survival are just outperforming in raids. So I guess you can say BM also stands for bottom of the meter, because it usually looks like this when we're raid testing on the beta. However, there's still great levelers all the way up to max level, so by that time you reach level 90, you could any day just respec into survival. At level 85, marksmen are actually pretty fun to play, as you will be dealing huge burst damage, and you can take down one target in next to no time. It doesn't really require any cooldowns, it just requires an aim shot and a chimera shot. So if you're really into big crits, where you're pretty much also one-shotting one target, well then the specialization might be the right choice for you. Just be aware that AoE wise they're not that great, also because we will have to manually apply our Serpent Sting, and this is a big damage decrease when you have to spend focus on something like this. Next on this list, the Death Knight. The benefit of choosing Blood is that you're doing a lot of single target but also AoE damage. At the same time, if you like to dungeon farm, then as a tank you usually have next to instant Qs. Whereas Frost and Unholy, you are of course also doing a decent amount of single and AoE damage, but the downside is that you're not as tanky, so you won't be able to solo as many quests, and there will also be more downtime where you need to regen health. No matter what specialization I'm playing, then this is usually how my talent tree will look like. And now an explanation. At level 56 we can choose Unholy Blight. The reason why I dislike this is because of the long cooldown. And don't forget, we also have other ways to spread our diseases, so why choose a talent like this? Plague Leech is way better. A low cooldown where you're instantly restoring 2 death runes. So you can use this on whatever ability you would like. However, I feel like Rolling Blood is way better, as I'm using Blood Bottle quite often, and I just need to use this on one target with diseases and it will be spread to nearby enemies. I mainly choose Lichborn as my level 57 talent, as I can now use Death Coil to heal myself. Just be aware that you can only do this for 10 seconds, but it provides a ton of healing, which is absolutely insane. The reason why I dislike Anti-Magic Zone is because you're not fighting casters that often, and when you are, then they don't usually get to cast on you because of your interrupt and other ways to prevent spell damage. I also dislike the third option, as you only have a 3 seconds window to be healed for a high amount, else you will end up dying anyway. The reason why I like Death's Advance is mainly because of the passive 10% increased movement speed, so you can run faster when you need to kite or get to the next enemy. But the activate is also insane for more movement speed and not being able to be slowed below 100% of your normal movement speed for 6 seconds. In my opinion, Chillblains is mainly a PvP talent, and it's not really worth picking as you won't be using Change of Eyes as often and you don't really need to kite as well. I mean, you should be fine being in close combat most of the time. The last option isn't really bad. A 5-second stun with a low cooldown is absolutely amazing when you're just fighting one target, but be aware it will also replace your Strangulate, so you're silenced against casters. And because we are often fighting many targets at the same time, then the spell is not really that useful, at least not if we compare it to Death's Advance. At level 60 we can choose Death Pack at 2 minutes cooldown, but it's also healing you for 50% of your maximum health. The second option is definitely not bad either, as it's doing a lot of damage, but also healing you. The downside is that it's requiring a death rune, but there's no cooldown. So this is also a talent I usually pick, but it all depends on the different fights. I don't like the last option, as it's not an instant heal, and it also requires a lot of runic power to be healing you for a high amount. And when you activate this, you will therefore not have more runic power to do damage, or be able to heal yourself with Lichborn and Death Coils. All 3 talents at level 75 are decent options. The first one here, where your Death Coil, Frost Strike and Rune Strike have a 45% chance to increase your rune regeneration by 100% for 2.5 seconds. Another option is to make the same spells have a 45% chance to activate a random fully depleted rune. For those of you who would much rather like to time when you're getting your death runes, go for Blood Tap like I do. When you're using the very same spells, you're being generated 2 blood charges, and you can have a total of 12 of these. In other words, you can store 2 death runes for whenever you would like these, and then you could always use 2 more Death Coils, Frost Strikes or Rune Strikes and have enough blood charges to activate yet another death rune. So what glyphs do I like to use? The first one here is an absolute must-have. When you're slaying an enemy, you can swap into Unholy Presence or Frost Presence and use a free Death Strike. In other words, you will have next to no downtime, as you won't need to use food or bandages as often. And don't forget this one, whenever you kill an enemy, the cooldown of your Death Grip will also be reset, so you can grab yet another one. This allows you to also spend next to no time going between the different creatures. Anti-Magic Shell can be quite good, but it all depends on your specialization and also how often you're fighting casters. If you need more ways to kite, you could also go for Death and Decay, as all enemies within the circle will now also have their movement speed reduced by 50%. For minor glyphs, I reduced the cast time of my Death Gate by 60%. I'll be able to fall for a greater distance without suffering damage when I use my Path of Frost, and whenever my Death Grip fails because the target is immune, the cooldown will also be reset. Next up, I'll compare the different specializations at different levels to figure out what will be the best and most efficient to level S. Once you have finished your storyline, you will be moving into Outland, and here I'm testing the Frost specialization, AoE damage, but also single target wise. When it comes to AoE, I'm not really doing that great, and my survivability isn't really great either, so I don't really like this specialization so far. When it comes to single target damage, you are doing better, but if you're for example fighting an elite or 2, you're going to be in big trouble because you don't have a lot of survivability or self-healing. Therefore, I'm also usually not leveling as Frost in Burning Crusade content. But what about the other DPS specialization, Unholy? Is it doing any better? When we are looking at the damage done single target wise, it's definitely not bad. I can easily kill a target and move on, pretty much without ever having to pay attention to my health bar. A big benefit as Unholy is that you can control your pet way better, it's doing way more damage and not just lasting for 1 minute. Therefore, it's also important to keep it alive, else you'll be doing way less damage. At the same time, Frost and Unholy has a common problem, and this is not just our self-healing, but also the opportunity to be dealing with many spellcasters at the same time. We're simply taking way too much damage, and this can therefore also be quite deadly. For those specific reasons, I'm always leveling as Blood during Burning Crusade content. I can pull way more enemies, I don't really have to pay attention to my health, and my damage is just absolutely insane. Yeah, it is just the best specialization in my opinion. Here I'm also fighting an elite pretty close to my own level, and because of the insane self-healing, I'm able to take this down. If I were leveling as Frost and Unholy, I would definitely have to find a group. In other words, since I'm able to do something like this, you can also imagine how easy it is for me to kill a non-elite, or well, 5 or 10 non-elites at the same time. What about when we're moving into Wrath of the Lich King content? Is Unholy and Frost becoming better? Yeah, better than they were in Burning Crusade content, as we're getting new spells and also amazing passives. However, they're still not anywhere close to be competing with the Blood Death Knight. This is mainly due to them still having the best damage, and at the same time also new cooldowns you can activate when you're dropping low, or well, just to stay high health most of the time. Therefore, you can now also head into dungeons and solo some of these, as you can pull 3 and up to 6 elites at the very same time, and there's no way an Unholy or Frost can outlevel something like this. And why? It's probably not a surprise that I'm always sticking to this specialization in Wrath of the Lich King and also in Cataclysm content. But what about when we reach level 85 or higher and we need to level in Mist of Pandaria? Things are finally changing. In this footage, I'm leveling as Unholy, and single target wise it's not bad. I'm not really struggling with health, just like I have never really done, at least not single target wise. But my pet are still doing pretty good damage, and I'm having so many things I can activate to just continue going on and on. But what about AoE damage, or well, dealing with multiple targets at the same time? Has it got better? As long as these are not casters, I should not be struggling, and finally I can pull more than 5 enemies and actually take those down without dying. I will of course need to pay attention to my health and use cooldowns during such a big pull, but then I can always get back to killing 1 or 2 enemies at the same time until my cooldowns are ready. Why I also like to level as Unholy, and this is mainly for those of you who would like to DPS at max level. Unholy are doing so good in phase 1 and 2. Yeah, in some cases actually better than Frost. So if you would like to DPS at max level, then it is a good decision to be leveling from 85 to 90 as Unholy and learn about the different spells, rotations, and also how you should be doing max DPS, so you're ready to start dungeon farming and later on raid as Unholy. So are you telling me Frost are not great for leveling? Well, single target wise, I would say they're doing better than the Unholy Death Knight, but when it comes to comparing the AoE damage, or well, survivability and doing a lot of AoE damage to many targets at the same time, it just seems like they're not performing as great. So this is mainly just for killing 1 or 2 targets at the same time. How about the Blood Death Knight? Are they still the best levelers like they were from Burning Crusade and into Cataclysm zones? Sadly, when we're looking at single target damage, they're actually not doing that great. At least this is my opinion, but I just feel like you have way more things to be pressing as Frost and Unholy, and therefore also constant damage. When your single target damage isn't great, you are also forced to be doing huge AoE pulls to be leveling efficiently. Don't worry, it is a possibility to constantly do this as long as there's not too much competition, because you always have cooldowns you can activate, where the other 2 specializations will be using every single cooldown when they're doing a pull like this. When you were leveling in Burning Crusade and up to Cataclysm content, it were also efficient just to dungeon farm. This is not a strategy I recommend you from 85 to 90, because there's many things you would like to unlock through questing. For example, upcoming daily quests, rare rewards, and also a ton of reputation that will be important in the beginning for upcoming epic items. So what is the best specialization to choose for your Mist of Pandaria leveling? Choose what looks the most fun, but always have in mind what you will be playing at max level, and then maybe level as that specialization so you're used to everything without having to learn all of this when you reach max level. So how about the monk? There's 3 different specializations you can level as. Brewmaster, that is tank, will be dungeon farming but can also perform pretty decent in the open world. Mistweaver that will be healing in dungeons, and Windwalker melee DPS with 2 one-hand weapons. This is extremely useful for those of you that would just like to skip dungeon farming and mainly focus on questing. So Brewmaster if you would like to tank, but also do open world content, and Windwalker if you're mainly just solo leveling. By the time you reach level 15, 30 and so on, you will unlock different talents, and these are the different talents I usually pick when leveling up. There will be more information later in the video where I will also talk about each individual talent. Alright, so when you log in for the first time, you should definitely open up your Earlham tab and start looking for leather items and also different weapons you can use. This of course all depends if you have already unlocked Earlham items from some other characters. Else you would like to go for leather items and mainly try to prioritize going for the ones with agility and stamina instead of intellect and stamina, because leveling as a healer is definitely not going to be efficient. You can also create the Earlham items on another character and enchant these and then send them to your newly fresh monk. Why? Well, because enchants will improve your character's performance, and there is a big change now in Mist of Pandaria. There's no level restrictions to weapon enchants and others. So if you would like to, for example, get Mongoose or something else on your weapon, well then this is going to be an opportunity. What I would also like to highlight is that it's going to be important to use a two-hand weapon from level 1 to 10. This is because in the beginning you won't be able to equip 2 one-hand weapons at the same time, as this requires you to reach level 10 and spec into Windwalker. In the starting area, I usually just farm creatures from level 1 to 5, as I feel like this is the most efficient way, especially because you're pretty much one-shotting everything, so there's no downtime going in between different questing areas. By the time I reach level 5, I'll leave the starting area and move on to the next questing hub. This is also the time when you unlock a new skill called Roll. You can combine this together with a swiftness potion that will increase your movement speed by 50% for 15 seconds. So at this level you will be able to travel around super quickly even without a mount. What you should also be aware of is the different rare creatures. These you can easily find in these zones, and there's going to be so many different spawn locations. The benefit of killing a rare is that you will be rewarded with an insane amount of experience at low level. We're talking about half to 1 level just from one creature. But what if you don't know about these rare creature spawn locations? Well, don't worry, I'm using an add-on called Rare Scanner. This will make a huge warning sound if there's a nearby rare, and on your map you can also see all the different spawn locations together with the different loot tables. So in my opinion, this is a must-have add-on, as you will not only benefit from this in the starting zones, no, throughout all of your leveling from 1 to 90, as this add-on is working in each individual zone. Now that I'm already talking about add-ons, then I would also like to highlight the leveling guide I'm using. It will work for monks, pandas, and of course every single class in the game from level 1 to 90. On your map there will be different numbers indicating where you will have to hit. There's going to be a tooltip explaining what you will need to do and also where you need to hit. On top of this, there's going to be an arrow you can follow, an easy target that will also target and mark the enemies you'll need to slay, and many other useful things. Like I mentioned, it works from 1 to 90, so you can choose each individual zone you would like to quest in. You just choose this and then it will tell you where you will need to hit next. To download and test out this add-on for free, make sure to use the redirect link below this video. It will of course work for both factions. It will automatically detect your class, race, and also what quest you have already done. So you could for example be level 54, install the add-on, and now it automatically detects what you have already done, and it will tell you where you have to hit next to level up efficiently. Alright, so back to the leveling. As you got to level 5, you wanted to swap to the next questing hub, and here you will be questing from level 5 up to around level 10. Remember to also look out for the different rare creatures. As you reach level 10, you then have 3 different options to level as Mistweaver, Windwalker, and Brewmaster. I know I mentioned Brewmaster and Windwalker being the best, but it's not like you cannot level up as a Mistweaver. It's just not as efficient. But the benefit is that you're unlocking heals. So the moment you reach level 15, you could start healing in dungeons and practice your different skills and rotations until you reach max level. The reason why you can level up as a healer in the open world is because we're getting a new stance that will increase haste from items by 50% and your attack power is increased by 200%, equal to your spell power. So yeah, it is possible to kill creatures as a healer with healing items. However, Brewmaster and Windwalker are faster. Let me show you Brewmaster followed by Windwalker. As a Brewmaster, you can throw these kicks that will slow enemies, so you can kite around easily in the beginning, and this is going to be way better when you're also unlocking different AoE skills. Your survivability is also way better, but the downside is that at low level, up to around level 18, you won't have any AoE skills. So you can pull many enemies, and yeah, you can probably deal with these, but you're not doing a lot of damage and killing them fast. This is completely different with Windwalker, where you're unlocking Fist of Fury at level 10. This is an AoE skill where you will be hitting all enemies and also stunning them. So from level 10 to 18, I would definitely level up as this specialization. Also because you perform super decent against 1 or 2 creatures, but try to see what happens when I'm pulling many and I'm using Fist of Fury. There's nothing that can compare to this leveling speed, and yeah, this is why I usually go for this from level 1 to 18. In fact, all the way up to max level. And like I mentioned, as Windwalker, you will be able to use 2 one-hands, so enchant both of these, especially if it's going to be a proc enchant, as you will be able to benefit from both enchants. The moment you have chosen your specialization, you then want to get back to questing and do this from level 10 to 15. I always do this in the next zone, so in this case, in the Barrens, if I were playing a human, it would be Westfall. The moment you reach level 15, you will be able to choose your first talent. Momentum, that increases your movement speed by 25% for 10 seconds after performing a roll, and this can stack up to 2 times. Tiger's Lust, that removes all immobilize and movement impairing effects and also increases your movement speed by 70% for 6 seconds. And the last one increases your roll by 1 and also reducing the cooldown. The benefit of this is that it's a passive, so not a skill you will have to activate. This is of course also the same case with Momentum. But Tiger's Lust is just insanely good. Let's say you're for example being rooted in place and you have cooldowns on your roll, then you can activate this to free yourself and start running away, preventing a death. The benefit of Momentum is that you will always have a passive movement speed after using your roll, so you can run around super quickly before you're going to be using your mount at level 20. And you can then also combine this together with swiftness potions that you're using whenever you don't have this buff and your roll is on cooldown. But the reason why I don't use this as often is because I'm not able to kill enemies as I'm running. I'll simply be running too far away from them and start evading. At level 15, you also have the opportunity to start dungeon farming for bonus experience and also these goods that will contain different rare items. The benefit of doing dungeons is that there will also be many quests you can do, and you can simply just spam these over and over without having to spend a lot of time traveling in between different zones because you're out leveling them. If you're playing healer and tank, you will also have close to instant queues, so it is definitely a good way to level up. Even though the random dungeon finder are amazing, then remember it's going to be random dungeons. At some point you might have done a lot of the same, and this is where specific dungeons could become handy as you sign for the ones you haven't done, where there's going to be many quests you can complete. The last thing I would also like to highlight at level 15 is that you can purchase these items on the auction house that instantly begins a quest that you hand in during the Darkmoon Fair, but you will only be able to do it during the event. At level 18, things start to change. As Windwalker, you will now have Flying Serpent Cake you can use to travel even further and also deal damage with. Yeah, it is of course nice for traveling around, but it's going to be way better as a Brewmaster. Why? Well, at level 18, you will finally unlock your ability to start doing decent AoE damage. The name of this ability is Breath of Fire, but you're also getting another amazing skill. This is where you will start charging towards the target, and that target will also charge towards you and stunning him. All nearby enemies will also be stunned at the same time, so this is amazing for kiting around, stunning enemies, and then doing some AoE, and then proceed to kite around. I would still say that Windwalker are better for open world leveling, because you can kill 1 or 2 enemies in next to no time, and you can still do decent AoE damage. But the benefit of playing Brewmaster is that you could any day just sign up for a dungeon and also instantly join a party, because there's always a high need for tanks. By the time you reach level 20, you can of course unlock your 60% ground mount skill, but there's something else to be looking forward to as well. This is where you'll be able to teleport yourself to Pandaria and go to the monk location. At this area there will be a quest that rewards you a bit of experience, but also a rare weapon, so if you don't have heirloom weapons, it's going to be a bit of an upgrade. But the main reason for doing this quest is that at the end you will also receive a buff that increases the experience you're being rewarded from quests and killing enemies by an additional 50%. So at this point you will be able to catch up so quickly. What I would also like to highlight is that this quest will also unlock at level 30, 40 and so on, and even become a daily quest. It will of course become more and more difficult as you level up, but you will be able to continue getting this buff every single day. The best stat as a monk DPS is agility, so remember to also purchase different elixirs of agility, as this will improve your character's performance. Finally, you have made it to level 30, and now it's time for you to pick your second talent. Chi Burst is where you will be shooting a bit of damage in the direction you're facing, but you will also be able to heal allies. I don't pick this as often, but it is nice for pulling enemies, as you will be able to pull without having to run in. The second option is where you'll be doing a bit of AoE damage as you're running around. There isn't a long cooldown, or well, the duration of this is longer compared to the cooldown, so you can keep this active. However, the damage isn't really that great, which is why I always go with the last option, which is Chi Wave. This is an ability that jumps between different targets, but dealing a high amount of damage. When you're leveling as a Windwalker, you probably won't be pulling 6 enemies at the same time anyway, so this is becoming pretty useful for just killing 1 or 2 enemies in next to no time. It will also bounce to friendly players and heal them too. For those of you who wish to pull more enemies at the same time, then I would definitely go with one of the 2 other talents. So like I mentioned earlier, the moment you reach level 30, there would also be a new monk quest you should do to get the experience buff. And here you will also be able to pick up the daily quest as well. Else the next quest will be at level 40, 50 and so on. There should also be a quest at level 85, if not, well then just pick up the daily quest. And by the way, at level 38 there will also be a better elixir of agility, so head to the auction house and purchase this immediately. What you should also be aware of is that at the Monk Pandaria area, you will be able to upgrade your weapons as you're leveling up. So for those of you without an heirloom weapon, well then you could come back here every 10 levels and purchase a new weapon. At this location, there will also be another NPC you can speak to, where you can purchase yourself different food buffs. Things that will also improve your character's performance to level up quicker. I guess it's also a good time to do a bit of a leveling comparison. At level 40 and above, Brewmaster are still insane, and in my opinion, way better as you're leveling up. You're unlocking new skills to increase your survivability, and as you can see right here, I'm taking next to no damage, and I can kill enemies super quickly. Here I level as Windwalker, and I gotta be honest, it seems like Brewmaster are starting to catch up, because I can't deal with many enemies at the same time, or well I can in a way, but I'm also losing a lot of health. So a couple of mistakes and you could potentially end up dying. I am however still killing 1 or 2 enemies way faster compared to Brewmaster. So if you prefer just to kill 1 or 2 enemies at the same time, then stick to Windwalker, but if you would like to do way bigger pulls, then I would honestly give Brewmaster a shot. At level 45 we can pick our next talent, and Chi Brew is always my go-to, as I can use this to instantly restore 2 Chi, and I can use this 2 times in a row, so instantly have 4 Chi and be ready to deal a lot of damage. The second option, Ascension, is not bad either, as it's a passive that will increase your energy regen, increase your chi by 1, and also mana if you're playing healer. And because this is a passive, then you can stick to your current rotation without having to include a new skill. Power strikes are not great at all, or well, it's not a skill I like. Even though it is a passive, then I would go for either Ascension or Chi Brew. At level 47, there's a quest chain you can do in Tanaris at Gadgetsan. Like I mentioned, it's a quest chain, so there's going to be quite a few enemies or quests to do in a row. It usually requires 3 people, but as a monk you can easily solo this on your own. And because there's so many quests, then you can easily get half a level in close to 5 minutes. The next thing you would also like to know is that at level 50 you can purchase cleft-hide leg armors and perform this enchant on your legs to increase your performance. If you have heirloom legs, you might already have enchanted this and used it as you were leveling up. And at level 55 a new elixir also becomes available, and this you should start grabbing from the auction house or craft yourself if you're leveling up alchemy. The moment you reach level 58, you should leave classic content and move to Burning Crusade. Why? Well, because there's going to be a lot of quests you can pick up, but these quests also reward you a lot more experience compared to the traditional classic quest. So you will be leveling quicker by going here at 58 instead of level 60. Now is also the perfect time to do a new leveling comparison. And here's Windwalker, I'm still blasting through enemies. Yeah, I would however not pull 5 or 6 enemies at this point, because you'll probably end up dying. Yeah, you are doing amazing single target damage, but your AoEing is not really that great compared to when you were low level. This is definitely not the problem as a brewmaster. You're still doing so great when you're pulling many enemies, and your survivability has got even better. But in Outland there's going to be many casters, and a lot of these enemies are not stacked together like they were in classic content, so you cannot just run around and pull many of these, as there will be casters shooting at you. But like you can see, I'm not taking any damage, or well, I'm unkillable at this point. So it all comes down to if you're going to quest and once again kill 1 or 2 enemies, or if you would like to do huge pulls but also have a lot of downtime because you have to go back and forward between the different enemies. Now you have also reached level 60, and the first thing you should do is to learn the next riding skill, allowing you to fly around in Outland so you can skip many enemies and go to areas much quicker. Next I would then stay in Hellfire up to around level 60, and in some cases also 61 if I'm doing quests I really enjoy, and then I would swap to Sangamarsh up to around level 64 until I would start questing in Nagrand. But what about the level 60 talents? I always go for Leg Sweep, as I will be able to stun all enemies within 5 yards, and this stun will last for 5 seconds, giving me enough time to perform some heals, do a lot of AoE damage, or simply run away and kite. Even though charging Ox Wave has a lower cooldown, then the stun duration is only 3 seconds, and it's only stunning enemies in its path, so in the direction you're facing. This is not great if there's going to be enemies behind you. And the last thing, Ring of Peace, yeah, not really that great, as you won't be fighting casters all the time, and you don't really want to disarm the enemies. You would much rather like to stun the enemies, as during those 5 seconds you won't be taking any damage anyway. At level 64 you are probably already questing in Nagrand, and at level 65 you then want to head to this area where you can pick up a long quest chain. This quest chain will tell you to slay different elite enemies, and you probably won't be able to solo all of them on your own, so try to assemble a 2 or 3 man party. This quest chain will reward you an insane amount of experience, and at the end also a blue weapon, so an upgrade if you're not using an heirloom. There's going to be a weapon for Windwalker, Mistweaver, and also Brewmaster. Next you want to stay in Nagrand up to around 66 or 67. At level 67 you would like to swap to Netherstorm and here stay for 1 level. At level 68 I would then like to swap to Northrend, as Northrend rewards you better loot and experience. At level 68 you can also learn Cold Weather Flying, which allows you to fly around in Northrend. For those of you wondering, I stay in the first leveling zone up to 71, where I will then swap to the next possible zone, as I will be able to pick up many quests at that level. I will then stay in that zone up to 74, where I will swap to Zul'Drak. In Zul'Drak there's going to be so many quests. Also at this camp there's going to be different elite quests, or well, quests that used to be elite, rewarding you an insane amount of experience. And most of these are also close to each other. At level 75 you want to go to the middle of Zul'Drak and do the arena quest chain, just like the one you did in Negrand in Burning Crusade content. This will definitely require you to assemble a party, but you're being rewarded with a lot of experience, and at the end also a blue weapon. At level 75 you should also remember to pick your next talent. I always go for diffuse magic, because as a monk you don't have many ways to counter casters. You will of course have your interrupt and also your short CC, but this is just great for when you can't CC and you're doing AoE pulls. This is why I'm also not picking any of the two other talents, but you can play around with them and see what you prefer yourself. So how should we continue to level from here and up to 80 until we swap to Cataclysm content? I would definitely dungeon farm as tank and healer, as you'll probably have your instant Qs. But when you're leveling as Windwalker, it's going to be important to have epic flying skill if you wish to level up efficiently. And from 75 to 80 there's going to be quite a bit of flying around, so if you just have your normal flying skill you're going to spend a lot of time. So as a Windwalker with normal flying skill only, I would try to combine my leveling with some dungeon farming. At level 75 you also gotta remember that you can purchase the Flask of Endless Rage, which increases your attack power by 180. Even though you're not level 77 yet, then you should also check for other items while you're here on the auction house. Mainly items from Cataclysm, which requires you to be level 77. The item level are so insanely high compared to traditional Wrath of the Lich King items at level 77. So purchase these to make your 77 to 78 leveling so much quicker. Also look for level 78 rare Cataclysm items. Why? Because the weapons will improve your character's performance. Even if you have heirloom weapons, the damage you do with this is absolutely busted, and you will be able to solo dungeons on your own. I will be soloing Wrath of the Lich King dungeons up to around 81. We're not talking about heading into Cataclysm dungeons, those will be too difficult, but because you're soloing these dungeons, you're being rewarded with a high amount of experience, and you could in fact stay here all the way up to 82 if you wish to do so. Just be aware that the moment you reach level 80, you should go back to the auction house and purchase this Cataclysm Flask that increases your agility by 300. And also look out for this insane potion. It is a short duration, but it's increasing your agility by a high amount, so you can combine this together when you're using many different cooldowns. While you're in Stormwind City and Orgrimmar, it's also time for you to upgrade your heirloom items if you haven't already done this, else they won't be working from level 80 to 85 and in Cataclysm zones. If you haven't upgraded anything so far, then I would recommend you to upgrade items that increases your experience gained, followed by the weapons. When I'm going to level in Cataclysm zones, I always stick to Mount Hyjal from 80 to 82. I don't like to go to Vashj'ir because this is an underwater zone, so I won't be able to benefit from my epic flying skill. And Vashj'ir is also a slower zone to be leveling in compared to Mount Hyjal. At level 82 I'll then swap to Deepholm, and remember, on the auction house you can also purchase this potion that will teleport you directly to Deepholm. I would however also recommend you to combine this with questing. From 80 to 85 there's not going to be that many dungeons, but the leveling is also super quickly, so why not take advantage of doing one of each dungeon to get the quest rewards, the experience and a bit of gold. When you get to level 84, it's also going to be important that you quest in Twilight Highlands, as this will be the quickest zone to level up in. Also because there's going to be an arena quest chain here that rewards you around 4 bars worth of experience and a rare weapon at the end. When you reach level 85, it's time for you to move to Pandaria, and I do the Jade Forest up to 86. Then I'll swap to the next zone, Valley of the Four Winds, and this I like to combine together with the zone right below. By doing this, you should be able to stay in those two up to around 88. Then I would like to swap to the zone at the north, Conlies mid, and here stay up to 89. And then the final level I'll do at the bottom left, which is Dread Waste. Here you want to go the moment you reach level 89, because there's many important quests you would like to do as you're leveling up, also because there's going to be some pretty unique and rare items you can obtain that will help you when you're going to do your first dungeons at max level, so gear that will make it easier for you to head into level 90 dungeons. By the way, when you're leveling in Pandaria, you should always pay attention to rare creatures, as they have a guaranteed chance to drop a rare item, and these will most likely replace any of your current items as you're leveling up. Alright, so now it's time for me to cover the Druid. By the time you reach level 10, you can choose between Balance, Feral, Guardian, and Restoration. Balance is a spellcaster that becomes better and better as you're leveling up. Feral is your melee DPS where you're fighting in cat form, and at level 10 they're extremely overpowered if you don't have heirloom items. Guardian is your tank specialization for those of you who would like to level in the open world, and also sometimes in dungeons where you'll most likely have instant queues. Restoration are awful in the open world when you have to solo level, so this is mainly just for someone who would like to heal and level up in dungeons. Alright, so let's do our first leveling comparison. Here I'm leveling as Balance, and as you can see my Wrath is doing pretty good damage. But the thing is that if you're using heirloom items, you will actually benefit much more from just casting your Moonfire. Here you can just apply the dot to each individual target, and this you just continue to do as you're running from one creature to another. It is extremely powerful and definitely a great way to level. But if you're not using heirloom items, your damage won't be as great, and you'll probably also run out of mana at some point. If you're using a heirloom weapon, I would recommend you to get Power Torrent, as it has a high chance of proccing additional intellect when you're using your heal over time, but also the dot from your Moonfire. If you don't have access to heirloom items, then I would recommend you to level as Feral, as you're not as gear dependent. Therefore, with for example white and green items at level 10, you will be able to level up pretty decently. If you have heirloom items, well then on your weapon I would recommend you to get Mongoose, as it has a high chance of proccing additional agility but also increasing your haste. How about Guardian? Well, the downside is that your Mangle has a cooldown when used in bear form, where if you use this in cat form it only requires energy but there's no cooldown. Therefore, even though you're pulling many enemies, then you won't really be able to do a lot of damage, and as of right now, you don't have any way to cleave besides using your Moonfire to pull these enemies. Sadly, Swipe unlocks at level 22 and Trash at level 28, and you'll need both of these abilities to be doing some pretty decent cleave damage and therefore also some efficient leveling. So when I'm leveling a Druid at low level, I'm always choosing between Balance and Feral. But there is a downside to being a DPS if you wish to dungeon farm, because as a DPS you won't have instant queues, and sometimes you will have to wait for a long time until you're being invited. In other words, you will need to find a pre-made group if you wish to level up efficiently in dungeons. However, the most efficient way to level up is always just to be questing and farming creatures in the open world. Therefore, I'm always following a leveling guide, and the one I'm using I will also leave in the description below this video. It will work from level 1 to 90, and there's also a free version you can try out by using the link below this video. Alright, moving on to my talent trees. When you reach level 15 you can choose your very first talent, and as a Feral this is how it will look like as I'm leveling up. Later on I will also give an explanation for each individual choice. As a Guardian it looks a bit different, and also if you're leveling as a balanced Druid. At level 15 I like Wild Charge when leveling as Feral, but also sometimes as Guardian, as it only has a 15 seconds cooldown, allowing me to use this quite frequently. Where Displacer Beast has a 30 seconds cooldown, and this is mainly just good for PvP when you need to quickly get away. Feline Swiftness is amazing for balance, but sometimes also as Guardian, as it passively increases my movement speed by 15%. So when leveling as Guardian and Balance, it's easier for you to kite to prevent damage taken, but also pull more enemies. Sometimes as Feral I also like this talent a lot, but mainly I choose Wild Charge. However, for the sake of this video I'm gonna choose Feline Swiftness because all three will benefit. At level 30 I always choose this passive. Healing you for 5% of your maximum health every 5 seconds is insane for sustaining at a high amount of health at any given time. And therefore you won't need to spend as much time healing yourself. Renewal is a 2 minutes cooldown, but it's also restoring 30% of your maximum health. This is definitely also great, especially when leveling as a tank in dungeons, but also if you're dropping low when pulling many enemies as a balanced druid. I don't like Cenarion Ward, as we already have many other ways to be healing ourselves as a druid, so I usually just go for the first choice. Typhoon can be good if you need to knock back the enemies and also daze them. However, Mass Entanglement is just better, because if you accidentally pull many or you just need to get away quickly, then you can root all of them and run away. This is also great as balance, as you can then get some distance to cast a couple of heals and then start channeling your Hurricane. The reason why I don't like Fairy Swarm is because it won't benefit you much when you're pulling many enemies. Yeah, being able to slow one can be good, especially in PvP, but when you're just fighting one enemy, you'll most likely just be on top of them anyway, trying to kill them. Soul of the Forest isn't that great for balance or feral, but as Guardian it's amazing. Being able to generate more rage and also doing more damage with your mangle is very important, and I always choose this. Incarnation is great for leveling as feral, as you'll be able to use all your stealth abilities even without being in Prowl. At the same time, you can also use your Prowl in combat to get out of a sticky situation. Just be aware it has a 3 minutes cooldown. The reason why I like Force of Nature as balance is that it has a low recharge time, and you can even have 3 at the same time, dealing a ton of damage and also assisting you with roots. At level 75 we can choose Mighty Bash, a 50-second cooldown that stuns the enemy for 5 seconds. This is great when you just need to nuke one specific target and activate something like Incarnation as feral. The downside is that it's only affecting one target, where the Vortex is going to reduce all the target's movement speed and also dragging them back. Useful for kiting or if you need to get away, especially when you also combine it together with Mass Entanglements, as you can now get some distance to get some heals and start doing AoE or other kind of cleave damage. I usually never go for the last choice, because you most of the time already have damage over time on those targets, and then it will simply just break the CC. Therefore, I prefer this in PvP situations when you need to do mass CC. How about my different glyphs? As feral I choose this, so I don't have any movement penalty when using Prowl. And as balance I like Glyph of Omens, as it's providing me a benefit whenever I'm not in Eclipse. As Guardian I'm choosing Glyph of Maul, so I can finally hit one additional target with my Maul. But remember, your first glyph unlocks at level 25, so you won't be able to cleave until you unlock this or your swipe at level 22. No matter your specialization, then Glyph of Dash is a must-have, as it will reduce the cooldown by 1 minute, allowing you to use this way more frequently. And for your last and third option, well, choose whatever you like. It all depends on your specialization and what you prefer to get the most. For minor glyphs, go for this one, so you're also taking way less fall damage, no matter if you're in cat form or not. There will be plenty of quests in water environments, even in Mist of Pandaria, so make sure to go for this so you also increase your swim speed by additional 50%. And another must-have glyph is going to be this. It has no cooldown and you can teleport to many different locations as you're leveling up. The location of where you're being taken to all depends on your level, so at low level you of course won't be able to go to Wrath of the Lich King or Mist of Pandaria zones, but as you're leveling up you're also unlocking more. It is however still a great way to get to another zone when leveling in the open world, and then you can always keep your Hearthstone for main city. Alright, let's move on to some leveling comparison, this time in Burning Crusade content. Here I'm leveling as Guardian, and it is now way easier for me to pull more targets because I can easily cleave those. But what I also like a lot about this specialization is how tanky it is when questing. Yeah, I basically never really have to heal myself, and I'm also not taking much damage, so I can easily pull many targets. Yeah, in some cases up to 10 at the same time, and then I just stack them together and start cleaving. Super efficient leveling and also quite fun, especially because we can also combine this with dungeon leveling, where you'll most likely have instant queues. How about the Feral Druid? Is it any good now, like it were at low level? Definitely. It's still easy to level and kill one target at a time, but you can also just activate your Berserker and swipe. Yeah, you can spam your swipe, as it's not costing that much energy, and it is such a fun way to level. But then again, you will also need to wait for your cooldown before you can do something like this again. It is not the same case as a Guardian Druid. However, remember at level 60 we chose Incarnation, allowing us to use Ravage and other Prowl abilities without having to be in Prowl. In other words, when you're waiting for your Ravage, you can just blast through these enemies by spamming your Ravage. How about the Balance Druid? What I like is that you now have so many different ways to do damage, either single target wise, where you can sometimes even one-shot the enemy, or at least do a high amount of damage. And at the same time we can easily run around and just use our damage over time spells. What I like a lot about Balance is that you don't really depend on having cooldowns ready. You just need to pull enemies and once in a while apply a rejuvenation, and of course remember to cast your Star Surge whenever this is ready. Don't forget to always be using your Treants as well, as they're doing a huge amount of damage, but also helping you take down those creatures you haven't managed to kill with your damage over time. I feel like Balance is the most enjoyable way to level between Burning Crusade and Cataclysm content. But will it stay like this when we're moving into Mist of Pandaria zones? Let's figure out. As a balanced druid trying to kill one target at a time, well, this is not efficient leveling, and I also find it pretty boring. It is way better to be pulling a couple of targets and apply your Sunfire and Moonfire, also because you will then have a higher chance of proccing an instant Star Surge. In other words, it's way more efficient to be pulling more targets at the same time. And we're not just talking about 2 or 3, try to see if you can maybe pull 4, 5 or more targets, as you'll be benefiting way more from your different AoE abilities. You always have your Mass Entanglement and Vortex you can use to reduce the speed, drag them back and even root them in place. And then you can activate your Star Surge and even your Hurricane as well. In my opinion, it feels like my damage is slightly worse compared to when I was, for example, in Burning Crusade content. That being said, it is still a fun specialization to level as, and you're definitely not slow. How about the Feral Druid? Well, it's super easy to level, and you never really have to worry about your health, as you can just use your instant procs to do an instant heal. But single target wise, I do feel like Balance are actually outperforming. When we compare AoE, well, Feral are doing way better, especially when you activate your cooldowns, but the downside is that you'll also be in melee range, therefore having to pay attention to your health all the time. So even though your numbers will be bigger, then you'll have to spend time healing and also kiting way more, and this is where Balance will just constantly be doing damage as they're kiting, which is why I prefer that specialization in Mist of Pandaria zones. What about the Guardian Druid? Is it better than Feral and Balance? Let's figure out. Single target wise, you are not gonna outperform any of those two specializations. But when we are leveling as Guardian, we are not supposed to level by killing 1 or 2 creatures. No, you're meant to be doing massive pulls, and not just once in a while. No, every time you have the possibility to be doing so. And because we're not as cooldown dependent, or well, we don't really need these when we're pulling 10 creatures, then you can just go on and on. You just need to make sure there's a lot of nearby creatures. This is where our level 30 passive talent that instantly restores 5% health every 5 seconds also becomes handy, because you never really have to go out of your bear form to cast a heal. So what is my conclusion? Well, if I couldn't respec and I had to stick to one specialization from 10 to 90, it would definitely be Balance. If I had the opportunity to respec and I didn't have heirlooms, I would probably level as Feral up to around 30 or 40 and then start playing as Balance, and level like this up to 85 or 90. It all depends what your plan is at max level as well. Let's say you would like to tank, then you should probably level as Guardian in Mist of Pandaria zones, so you get used to your rotations and spells, so you don't have to practice these once you reach max level. But I would overall be leveling as Balance, as I find it super useful and also quite entertaining. Next on this list is the Warrior. When you reach level 10, you can choose between Arms, Fury and Protection. Protection are amazing for open world questing, but also for dungeon farming, as you'll pretty much have instant queues. However, Arms are also performing fairly decent, and why I like to level as the specialization is because at the end game you will mainly be playing as Arms in the beginning until the end of this expansion, at least if you wish to play as DPS Warrior. What I also like about arms and when you're leveling is that you'll pretty much be one or two shotting most enemies at low level, and it will stay like this for a long time. When you get to Mist of Pandaria, it's also gonna be the fastest way to level up, and you'll also be killing enemies super quickly. If we compare Fury to arms at low level, well then Fury are not really performing that great. It's doing way less damage, and when you're using 2 one-hands or 2 two-hands, there's also a higher chance of missing your attacks. How about protection? Well, just like arms, then I'm also pretty much one-shotting enemies, but if you pay attention to my gear, I'm using starter gear and no heirlooms. So if you don't have access to heirlooms, I would definitely level as protection in the beginning, also because you'll have instant queues for dungeons, so you can combine dungeon farming with questing. Leveling like this is also amazing if you plan to tank at max level, so you're used to your different abilities. How about as we level up? Does Fury get better? Well, not really in my opinion. You're not doing a high amount of single target, and if you pull 2 or 3 enemies at the same time, you're not really killing them that fast. At least not if we compare it to, for example, arms, where if your Mortal Strike crits, you're pretty much still one-shotting the enemies like you did at level 1. At this level range, it also seems like protection are doing better than arms, mainly because you can always pull 2 or 3 enemies and benefit from your revenge that hits multiple targets, and it's also doing an insane amount of damage. So the benefit here is that you can kill 2 or 3 at the same time, as arms are probably killing 1 or 2 enemies. No matter what specialization you choose, then the quickest way to level 90 is always going to be with quest. Therefore, I'm always following this amazing leveling guide. And the guide I will also leave in the description below this video, where there will be a redirect link to where you can download and test it out. How about my talent tree? Well, these are the talents I usually choose as I'm leveling up. But instead of just showing this, I'll also explain each talent and why I choose the following things as I do. The benefit of choosing Juggernaut, and why I always do this, is because I will be able to pretty much always have my charge ready for the next enemy. Where double time, yeah, you can charge 2 enemies in a row, but then at some point the recharge time is also going to be fairly slow, and then you will end up without a new charge for the next enemy. And Warbringer are mainly just for PvP. At level 30, I never choose Impending Victory because it will replace my Victory Rush, which is already built into my rotation and keeping me high on health. And Second Wind would force you to drop low before you would start benefiting from this heal. This is why I always choose Enraged Regeneration, as I can use this to heal myself and still have my Victory Rush to constantly get a bit of healing when I'm killing enemies. Staggering Shout are mainly for PvP, where Piercing Howl is amazing for kiting, but then again you don't want to kite the enemies, you would like to kill them quickly. Therefore I usually go with Disrupting Shout, because sometimes you might be fighting more than one caster and then you won't really benefit much from your pommel. This is where having an AoE pommel, or well, an AoE silence or interrupt effect is going to be amazing. Dragon Roar does a high amount of damage, but the negative thing is that it has a 1 minute cooldown and only knocks down the target for half a second. Where Shockwave might do less damage, but it has a 40 seconds cooldown, and if you hit 3 enemies, which you probably usually does, then it's reduced to 20 seconds, and it will also stun these enemies for 4 seconds, where you won't be taking any damage. I know Bladestorm does a high amount of damage, but it does nothing else, and this is why I'm always choosing Shockwave. How about level 75? In my opinion, for players leveling on their own, there's only one option, and this is Mass Spell Reflection, as you will benefit from the ability, where the 2 other talents only benefits you if you're leveling with someone else or dungeon farming. How about my different glyphs? At low level I like to choose Bull Rush for having more rage whenever I use my charge. Later on, I'd also like to swap it into Enraged Speed, so I'm moving faster whenever I'm enraged. A must-have is going to be improving my Victory Rush, as the healing done is now absolutely insane. We can only choose this because we didn't choose the talent Impending Victory. And another must-have is going to be this that increases the damage and cooldown of my Thunderclap. The reason for this is because as arms and protection, we have a passive that applies deep wounds at damage over time bleed whenever we use Thunderclap. Good when you're for example pulling many targets. What about minor glyphs? Here I go for Intimidating Shout, so the enemies are not running around and pulling more. And I also like bloody healing, so my bandages is 20% better whenever deep wounds is active. The third option is really up to you, as most of these are just visual effects. Next up, I'll compare the different specializations at level 85, so when you start leveling in Mist of Pandaria content. Here we have the Arms Warrior, and I constantly have something to press. I'm still doing a high amount of damage, and I'm always staying high on health due to my Victory Rush. This is a great spec, especially if we're just killing one enemy at a time. But what if you would like to kill multiple at the same time? Just activate your sweeping strikes and start cleaving all the enemies, and make sure to apply your bleed with Thunderclap. Why I like Arms so much is because in Mist of Pandaria content it's going to be easy to stack many enemies at the same time, so when you are playing a specialization that also has a ton of cleave damage, you will be leveling insanely fast. And this is why Arms are usually my most favorite spec when I move into Mist of Pandaria content. Just remember to have some cooldowns ready if you are doing these big pulls. The benefit of leveling Arms is that if you also plan to DPS at max level, then in phase 1 and 2, Arms is definitely going to outcompete the Fury. Is this the same case when we compare Fury and Arms leveling? Well, Arms are doing good, but Fury are definitely not doing bad either when it comes to single target damage. However, when we compare these two specializations and the possibility to be cleaving or well killing multiple targets at the same time, then it seems like Fury are not doing as great. This is the exact reason why I never level as Fury. I don't really care about killing a single creature a second faster compared to Arms, when Arms can also deal with many targets at the same time and usually kill these twice as quickly compared to Fury. So are you saying Arms are just a go-to specialization in Mist of Pandaria? In a way, yes, but then again, if you plan to be tanking at max level, then leveling as protection is not a bad decision, as you will get used to your rotations and skills. And remember, we will have instant queues for dungeons, or well, pretty much. So if you would like to do a couple of dungeons as you're leveling, it's going to be a possibility, and you can learn the new mechanics and fights, and even practice how you'll be running when you're also going to do these at max level, as you'll be doing them on heroic mode. When we compare Arms and Protection, Protection are not doing as great single target wise, but they're not doing bad when it comes to pulling many targets. The benefit of leveling as Protection compared to Arms when you're pulling many targets is that you never really have to care much about dropping low on health, as it usually never happens. Therefore, you are also not really depending that much on your cooldown, and I never really use them, because there is no need. This is why I can also continue to do big pulls, where Arms will have to wait for important cooldowns before it will be possible to do such a huge pull. So what is my conclusion? Level as whatever you like, it doesn't really matter, or well, it do in a way if you wish to speed level, but if you're just looking for a fun class to play and have a good time as you're leveling up, then play whatever you would like. However, if you would like to be efficient and play as DPS at max level, level as Arms, and if you plan to level efficiently and also tank at max level, I would recommend you to level as Protection. The last benefit of Protection is that if you don't have all those heirloom items to make Arms good at low level, then Protection might actually be a better choice no matter what, and level as this all the way up to 85. And when you reach level 85, you would then like to continue leveling as the specialization you plan to play at max level. Finally, it's time for me to cover the Rogue. By the time we reach level 10, we can choose our specialization. Subtlety is sadly not great, only for PvP, where combat is amazing because of Blade Flurry, so you can activate this and cleave up to 4 additional enemies. Assassination won't be able to cleave like you can as combat, but then again, you will be able to kill one specific target in next to no time, and sometimes you won't be able to stack the enemies anyway, and then you won't benefit much from having your Blade Flurry. I've decided not to include Subtlety because I don't find it useful for leveling, but here you see Assassination in action at level 10, and yeah, I'm basically one-shotting everything. I know I'm using heirlooms, but I haven't enchanted these items, and if you weren't using heirlooms, you would still be able to kill these in next to no time. At low level, I don't really use my stealth ability, even if I will be able to ambush these targets, then because my Mutilate is also doing so much damage, I'll pretty much be one-shotting them no matter what ability I'm using. Therefore, I don't really like to use my stealth, because it's also reducing my movement speed when I activate it. How about combat? Well, when I'm fighting one target at a time, I'm never activating my Blade Flurry. But what you can do is to simply activate your Blade Flurry and try to body pull as many as possible. Make sure they're of course not evading, but if you can stack 4 or 5 and you have evasion or another important cooldown, you should easily be able to take them down. Yeah, it is efficient leveling and it is better compared to assassination, but it also requires you to be stacking the enemies, else your Blade Flurry isn't really that beneficial. However, as we are leveling up, I feel like Blade Flurry also becomes better and better, especially because assassination won't all of a sudden be able to one-shot these enemies. So even though our killing speed will be slower, then you will also be able to kill 4 or 5 in probably the same time as you could kill 2 as assassination. By the way, a small tip, when you're killing someone, then remember if there's leftover combo points, you can still use these as you're running to the next enemy. So for example, to activate your slice and dice or recuperate. In a moment, I'll also show you my talent and glyph tree and then compare the different specializations at higher levels. But before I talk about these, then I would also like to highlight that the quickest way to level a rogue is definitely going to be by questing and farming creatures in the open world. Therefore, I'm always using a leveling guide, and the one I'm using right here will work from level 1 to 90. If you would like to try this out yourself, make sure to use the link below this video where it will redirect you to where you can download and try it for free. Alright, the moment we reach level 15, we can choose our first talent. And this is how my talent tree usually looks like when I'm leveling up a rogue. The first choice is definitely not a bad decision, especially because you will then have more energy for our second attack, where the second option is mainly for PvP, so you can cheap shot many targets or do different kind of CCs. The reason why I like Night Stalker is because first off, you're increasing the damage done by your ambush, but you will also be moving faster when you're using your stealth, where stealth will usually also reduce your movement speed, but this is no longer the case. And this makes this talent so important, especially because later on you would also like to use your stealth a lot more. I never pick Deadly Throw as you will be using your combo points and we already have another way to interrupt the targets with our kick. Nerve Strike is an amazing choice. Whenever your kidney or cheap shot ends, the damage done by that target will also be reduced by 50% for 6 seconds. In other words, if you're using these two stunts, you will be taking a lot less damage, and this is useful for always sustaining at high health. Combat Readiness isn't a bad choice either, and I always choose between these two, and it depends on the fight. Because with Combat Readiness, you can simply activate this whenever you would like to reduce the damage taken, and you don't need to stun the enemies, and you can pretty much time it for whenever you're going low or you don't have other important cooldowns ready. At 45 we can choose Elusiveness. This is amazing as you can use it whenever you're about to take a lot of damage. For example, if your Cloak of Shadow isn't ready when you're fighting casters. But be aware, by using Feint, you will also be spending a bit of energy that you can't spend on doing more damage. Leeching Poison is something I don't really like. We already have other poisons that is amazing, and on top of this you usually kill the target so quickly that you won't really be able to apply the poison and benefit much from being able to heal yourself. Remember, we already have a self-healing that is absolutely amazing, which is Recuperate, that only requires combo points. Why I like Cheat Death is because this is a passive, and whenever I drop below 10% health, I will also reduce my damage taken by 85% for 3 seconds, enough time for me to also react and maybe use a Vanish to prevent a death. Cloak and Dagger is a passive where you will always teleport behind the target as long as you're within 40 yards, and you're of course using either Ambush, Garrote or Cheap Shot. The downside is that it also requires you to be in stealth, so if you're fighting many targets, you won't benefit much from this. Where Shadow Step, yeah, you can use it and it's only a 20 seconds cooldown, but I mainly like this for PvP as well, so you can step to a target and instantly kick or do a cheap shot or Garrote. What I always choose is Burst of Speed. No cooldown, only requires 15 energy, and it increases your movement speed by 70% for 4 seconds. So you can use this if you need to get away from a sticky situation, but you can also use it to quickly gather many enemies and then benefit from your Blade Flurry. I don't really like dirty tricks, as I'm not using Gouge and Blind that often, especially because I don't really need to CC the targets, as I'm not really struggling. In PvP, it can be pretty decent. I don't like this poison either, as we already have other ways to stun. At the same time, you mainly won't be able to apply 4 of those debuffs before the target is dead anyway, where Prey on the Weak is my go-to choice, also because we already have Nerve Strike, so not only will our Kidney Shot and Cheap Shot reduce the target's damage taken, but it will also increase their damage taken during the effect. Next up, my different glyphs. At low level I like Glyph of Sprint, as it increases the speed by an additional 30%. This is amazing before you unlock Burst of Speed at level 60. An absolute must-have is Glyph of Deadly Momentum, as every time you kill someone that grants experience or honor, you will also refresh your Slice and Dice and recuperate. On top of this, I also like Glyph of Recuperate, so it heals for an additional 1%. But it is optional, as you can choose many other things, for example Glyph of Evasion to increase the duration by an additional 5 seconds. Another option is to replace your Glyph of Sprint with Evasion by the time you reach level 60 and unlock Burst of Speed. For minor glyphs I like Safe Fall, so I can fall even further without taking damage, but also applying my poisons 50% faster. It is not a big deal, but it is something that helps you overall. And of course also being able to run on water whenever I activate my sprint. What I also like is Disguise, so whenever I pickpocket a humanoid target, I will also copy their appearance for 5 minutes. This is pretty nice, especially if you don't like your current appearance on your own character. Next up, I'll compare Assassination and Combat at level 60 and then 85 when we're going to level in Mist of Pandaria zones. Here I'm leveling as Combat, but the downside is that when you get to Outland content, a lot of the creatures can't just be stacked that easily. Well, it is a possibility, but you will also need to spend a lot of time trying to gather them together. However, single target wise, you're not doing bad as Combat, you're actually doing pretty amazing damage, so it is still a decent specialization. What you might also end up encountering quite often is many casters, and here you won't really benefit from having Blade Flurry, as you can't hit them anyway, simply because they're standing far away and casting spells at you, and this can be quite deadly, and therefore I'll most likely have to vanish in such a situation. In this case I'm swapping back to Assassination, and it has been dominating ever since level 10 when it comes to single target kills. But you can see my damage isn't that great when I'm all of a sudden also fighting 2 enemies at the same time. So I guess you can imagine if we for example add 3 or 4 at the same time, it's not going to be a good situation at all. Yeah, you will be able to kill 1 target fast, but you also have 3 or 4 hitting you, and this could result in you end up dying as well. That being said, we always have our Zap, Blind, Kick, Gouge and different stunts, so you can easily take care of 3 or 4 at the same time. You just won't be able to do damage to all of them at the exact same time. So at level 60, there isn't really a specialization I would recommend you to play, because both of them are doing fine, and it all depends on your playstyle and what you like the most. How about when we reach level 85 and start leveling up in the new Mist of Pandaria zones? Well, single target wise, I feel like Combat is doing awful. Or well, I don't really like the damage, at least not when we compare to for example pulling 4 or more targets at the very same time. Here you'll be blasting, especially if you also activate your Adrenaline Rush, and of course also making sure you activate your Evasion. If you can do something like this, you can always pull more than 10 targets at the same time, because you're doing insane damage, and you also have a decent amount of survivability because you're dodging every single attack. But let's be real, there's going to be competition for creatures, and there will also be locations where you can't always just pull 5 to 10 enemies at the same time, and this is where Combat starts to struggle, and where Assassination are doing way better. If we for example look back at level 60, Combat and Assa were doing pretty close to each other, but when we talk about level 85 and above, well, then Assassination are probably killing targets twice as fast. And this is a huge difference, because we won't always just be able to pull those 5 enemies at the same time and benefit from having Blade Flurry. This is why I mainly level as this specialization when I'm in Mist of Pandaria zones, but sometimes also in Cataclysm and Wrath of the Lich King zones, so starting at level 68, because there's going to be way more situations where you'll just fight 1 target at the same time. But up to around level 68, I would most likely level as Combat and then swap to Assassination until I reach max level. For those of you still sticking around, as you can see here, Assassination are also not doing that great when it comes to cleaving creatures in Mist of Pandaria zones, even though we have Fan of Knife. The next class is going to be the Paladin. I would not recommend people to level as holy, as this is mainly just for dungeon farming, where protection are doing good in the open world and have also instant queues when it comes to most dungeons. This is not the same case as retribution, as you won't have instant queues, but you'll be killing stuff super quickly in the open world, so it's amazing for solo leveling. However, at low level, protection are doing really good if you don't have heirloom items, where retribution are actually depending a bit on having some decent gear to also be leveling quickly in the open world. So if you don't have heirloom items, I would honestly level as protection in the beginning and then maybe later on swap to retribution. And don't forget the instant queues you'll probably have as a tank for dungeon farming. Yeah, it is a good way to level up, as you won't have to swap zones constantly. This is the downside to retribution, but then again, questing in the open world is usually the quickest way to level up in Mist of Pandaria, especially when we get to level 85 to 90 content. This is why I'm always using a leveling guide when I'm leveling up all my characters in Mist of Pandaria, and the one I'm using right here I will also leave in the description below this video, where there will be a redirect link to where you can download and test it out. Next up, my talent and glyph tree, and also an explanation for choosing these. The reason why I always choose Pursuit of Justice is because it passively increases my movement speed, and if I have leftover holy power between the different creatures, I will also have more movement speed. Where a long arm requires you to hit an enemy, and when you hit these enemies, you usually don't want to be running from them. Speed of light, yeah, a nice movement speed, but then again, a short duration and a long cooldown. At level 30, I never choose evil is a point of view, as this is mainly just for PvP. You don't want to spend a lot of time chasing a target that is being feared. And this is the same case with repentance. You're never really struggling killing two enemies at the same time, so why do you need to CC one of them? Also because any damage taken will break the CC, and this prevents you from doing cleave damage. This is why I always choose Fist of Justice, as it reduces the cooldown of my stun by 30 seconds, but it's still stunning that target for 6 seconds, enough time for you to probably also finish them off, or at least cast a couple of heals and continue the fight. At level 45 there's a couple of decent options. Selfless Healer is definitely not bad. Using a Judgment will also make your next Flash of Light a lot quicker and better, but casting 3 Judgments will make your Flash of Light instant if you haven't used any of the procs. This is so insane because you'll then never really spend any time healing yourself beside one global cooldown. Eternal Flame is never really a go-to, as it also replaces our Word of Glory, so the only instant heal we already have if we don't choose Selfless Healer. This is mainly just for those of you who would like to level as holy, therefore it's usually a no-go. Sacred Shield is absolutely insane, as it's always providing a decent amount of absorb damage. Every time you're absorbing damage, it's also resulting in you not having to cast a heal. That being said, Selfless Healer is of course not bad, I just don't like the 1 second global cooldown after casting that instant heal. That's a global cooldown where you could instead have used it on doing more damage, and that's why I mainly choose Sacred Shield. At level 60 I never choose this talent when I'm playing Retribution Paladin or simply doing solo content. However, when you're going to tank or heal in dungeons, it's not a bad talent at all, as these spells will mainly benefit your party. My go-to is always Unbreakable Spirit, because no matter what I'm going to do, then having a reduced cooldown on these 3 spells is absolutely insane. Especially when we also compare it to the last possible talent. This is not going to be useful for solo content at all. I could see a Holy Paladin in dungeons maybe use this, but then again I feel like the other 2 choices are just better. By the time we reach level 75 we can choose Holy Avenger. This is definitely an amazing spell, but I dislike the 2 minutes cooldown. I don't really want to depend on an important cooldown before I can kill many enemies. This is why I usually never go for this choice. The other option is to improve our wings, but this is also a huge cooldown. Yeah, these 2 talents are not bad if it comes to bursting down an elite or something else, but then again most enemies won't be elite. Therefore I would much rather like to have a passive that constantly increases my damage, or well at least often, and this is what Divine Purpose does. Every time you use a Holy Power ability, there's a 25% chance that Divine Purpose will proc. When this procs, there's an 8 seconds window where you can use your next Holy Power ability without any holy power cost, and it will consume or will act as if you were using 3 holy powers. During those 8 seconds, you can for example also build up 5 holy power. So when you use the proc, you have 5 holy power to use 3 more holy power, and then you can generate 1 additional and hopefully get another free proc, just like it happens in this case. Absolutely insane for burst if you get the right procs. What about the different glyphs? Well, as Retry, I like to use Glyph of Inquisition and also Glyph of Mass Exorcism. But these 2 spells you don't unlock at low level, which is why I don't go for these in the beginning. Instead, I would much rather like to have this for my Judgment. So if I use Judgment on another target, it will also do 20% more damage. Usually this is what happens because you kill those enemies super quickly. As protection, that Judgment glyph is also amazing, but you would also like to go for this that increases the damage done by your next Shield of Righteousness up to a total of 30%. As protection, there's many useful glyphs, and for your third option it could for example be this that adds a physical damage reduction when you use your Divine Protection, but the magic damage taken has also been reduced from 40% to 20%. Or apply a daze to your Avenger Shield so you can kite a bit better, or Holy Wrath doing 50% more damage when the target is at 20% health or less, useful when you need to finish those off. There's 3 minor glyphs I always use. The first one here, so I can use my Hearthstone and bubble and get away without dying. When I use my Paladin mount, I will now also be casting my Blessing automatically, so I never really forget to apply this. And of course, Avenging Wrath, now applying a slow fall. It can be used to for example jump down a mountain without dying, but in most situations you will have your bubble to prevent fall damage anyway. Next up, I'll compare Protection and Retribution open world leveling, at low level but also in Mist of Pandaria zones. What you see here is Retribution at level 10 in action. Yeah, it is dominating. Most of my spells has always next to no cooldown when I'm engaging the next enemy, and I'm just blasting through these. This is why I like the specialization a lot, because you always have something to click. What about Protection? Well, you're also doing fairly decent single target damage, but it isn't as high compared to Retry, also because you're using a one-hand, while Retry is using a two-hand. However, if you can manage to stack enemies together and use your Avenger Shield, you're going to be doing a lot of damage, not just to one target, no, up to 3. But it also has a long cooldown, and this is why Retry is honestly better at this level. As Protection are leveling up, so close to level 40 and above, you will see them catching up. Single target wise they're not doing that great, but when you're pulling many enemies, you're benefiting from having so many different things that does cleave damage, or well, AoE damage. Remember, if you get a bit tired of this kind of leveling, or well, just doing quests in the open world, you can always sign up for dungeons and most likely have instant queues as tank. Retribution are still dominating in single target kills, as you're usually two-shotting most enemies. But we just saw what Protection are capable of doing when you're pulling 4, 5 or more enemies. This is sadly not the same case with Retry. You're not doing as much cleave damage, and your survivability is worse because you're not using a shield or having the other defensive skills. That being said, Retro Paladins are still performing really good above level 40, so it's not like you should be respeccing into Protection. In my opinion, you should just choose the specialization that fits your gameplay and that looks the most fun to you. How about when we move into Mist of Pandaria zones? Well, Retro Paladins are all of a sudden doing so much better when you're fighting 4 or 5 enemies at the same time. Yeah, you are sometimes struggling a bit with your health, but then you just do one flash of light and a word of glory, and you're back to almost full health and ready to engage a lot of new enemies. So all of a sudden you are playing a specialization that is dominating single target wise, but also performing really good when it comes to many targets at the same time. And this is why I usually level as Retribution in Mist of Pandaria zones from 85 to 90. How about Protection? Well, sadly they're not really doing that great when you're just fighting 1 or 2 enemies at the same time. Your kill speed are slow, so you are really depending on being able to do huge pulls. So quest where there's going to be many enemies you can pull at the same time, else the leveling speed are awful. But can't we just sign for dungeons and level like this to max level? Well, unlike low-level dungeons, then you actually want to be questing in Mist of Pandaria zones, as you will eventually unlock things such as a lot of reputation, new dailies, good quest rewards, and many other things. And these things you won't unlock if you dungeon level, and then you will have to come back to these zones and do them at max level. For that specific reason, I'm always recommending people to be questing in Mist of Pandaria from 85 to 90. The Priest is such an amazing class in Mist of Pandaria, so let's cover this as the next one. When you reach level 10, you have to choose your specialization. You can choose between Discipline, Holy, and Shadow. Discipline does decent damage in the open world with penance, and it's also an amazing heal for when you have to do dungeon farms. Holy are mainly just for healing, but it's doing awful damage, so I would not recommend you to level as this specialization. Instead, choose Shadow, as this is the best for open world leveling. But if you would like to dungeon and heal, you could any day also play as Discipline. But you won't be able to dungeon farm until level 15. So between 10 to 15, you could easily level up as Discipline. You just apply Shadow and Pain to all the targets, do a couple of smites, and of course also penance whenever this is ready. As Shadow, you would like to pull all these targets. The damage over time is pretty insane, but as you're trying to stack them together, you would like to pull new targets with your Mind Flay. This requires you to stand still, but it also does a huge amount of damage. So all the other targets will simply die due to your damage over time, and the rest to your Mind Flay. But like I mentioned in the beginning, there isn't a huge difference. Not until level 24, where we unlock our Shadow form. This is where you will be dealing even more damage, increasing your armor and haste, and now Shadow are starting to perform a lot better. Not just because of this, but because we're also getting 2 additional damage over time effects, for example Vampiric Touch, which has a cast time, and Devouring Plague that requires your Shadow Orbs. In my opinion, this is such a fun specialization to level as, and what I really like is that I never really have any downtime where I need to wait for new mana, or well, where I need to drink. The quickest way to 90 is going to be by questing, but also farming at the same time, like I do right here. Whenever I'm leveling up a new class, I'm always using a leveling guide, and the one I'm using right here will work from level 1 to 90, no matter what class, race, and also faction you're playing. There's going to be a free version you can test out, and also a full version, and this you can get simply by using the redirect link below this video. By using this link, you will also get a discount if you purchase the full version. Moving on to my talent tree, this is how it looks like as Shadow, but if I'm healing as Discipline, I would choose this one here instead at level 75, and this one here at 45. The reason why I'm not choosing Dominate Mind is because I don't want to stand still and start CCing. This is mainly for PvP, and this is the same case with Psyfiend. It's also randomly fearing targets, and this is not great as it can body pull more and also prevent you from hitting them. And don't forget, we already have an AoE fear. So what I choose is Void Tendrils, as this only has a 30 seconds cooldown. I can use it to escape from a sticky situation, but also stack enemies together, so I can apply all my damage over time abilities without taking any damage. At level 30, I don't like Body and Soul, even though this is a passive, so you don't really have to do anything beside applying your shield, but it only lasts for 4 seconds. Where Angelic Feather is a 10 seconds recharge, and you can have a total of 3 charges. This also increases your speed all the way up to 80% and for 6 seconds, so this is way better as you can pretty much increase your speed at all times. This also makes it easier for you to stack the creatures together and use your Void Tendrils, but also when you have finished them off and need to move to the next target. Our last choice at level 30 isn't really great. Yeah, for PvP situations it could be, but as we're leveling, it won't really help us. At level 45, I usually go for this one here, as it will also increase the damage done by my Mind Flay when I'm using Devouring Plague. But Mindbender with only a 1 minute cooldown, and this pet also dealing a decent amount of damage, is absolutely great as well, especially if you struggle with your mana. I usually never choose from Darkness Comes Light, unless I'm leveling as Discipline in dungeons, as that passive, or well that proc, is pretty insane. I like Desperate Prayer when leveling up, as it has a 2 minutes cooldown, but instantly healing me for 30% health. This is great if I make a huge mistake, but also in PvP situations. Spectral Guise turns you invisible. This can also be good if you need to, for example, get away from PvP, but also if you need to get past a difficult area. I usually choose Angelic Bulwark mainly because it's a passive, but be aware it also has a 90 seconds recharge whenever this procs. So if you don't like this, but you would much rather like to time when you would like to benefit from the heal, then go for Desperate Prayer. At level 75, you could go for Divine Insight if you're just killing 1 or 2 targets, or if you're playing Disciplined Priest. But if you like to chain pull many, I would not go for this talent. The other option is to get a 2 minutes cooldown. This is of course also great if you're combining it together with trinkets and other cooldowns to do a massive amount of burst damage. But in my opinion, Twist of Faith is way better, especially because of my playstyle where I'm pulling many targets at the same time and just multi-dotting. This is where I'll benefit more from this, as I'll basically have the buff all the time. What about my glyphs? Glyph of Reflective Shield is amazing, especially because it allows you to deal even more damage to everyone hitting you. You just gotta make sure you apply a new power word shield. Glyph of Levitate can be decent, as it's increasing your movement speed. When I'm fighting a difficult target, I like Mind Blast, so if I crit, I will also make that target unable to move for 4 seconds. Great for if you need to get away to do a heal and then get back into the fight. The last one is Glyph of Dispersion, as I feel like this is mandatory to get. As Discipline, you need to get this one so you can cast your penance as you're running, making you also able to actually do a bit more damage as you're leveling up, but I wouldn't recommend you to level as Discipline. What about minor glyphs? Well, most of these are basically just cosmetic, so it's not really gonna help you in any way, so choose whatever you like the most. At level 85 I'll do a quick comparison, but as you can see here, I'm not doing any great damage when leveling as Discipline. Remember, it's also not great to level in dungeons from 85 to 90, as you'll be missing many important quests and also factions you'll need to unlock. Therefore, you won't really benefit much from being able to heal as this specialization, as I wouldn't recommend you to be dungeon farming. Instead, you should just be questing, and of course, as Shadow Priest. Here I just apply my dots, spawn a new Angelic Feather, apply my dots to the next target, and then I start casting Mind Blast, Mind Flay, and finishing them off with my Shadow Word Death. When I need to spell cleave and deal with many targets at the same time, I pull with dots, I stack them together, use my Void Tendrils so they can't move, and I get some distance. Then I use my Mind Seer, as this will do damage to all nearby targets, making this specialization pretty decent for leveling. At least it's way better compared to Holy and Discipline. When you're going to do big pulls, I would also recommend you to pre-spawn your Angelic Feathers, so these will be up and you can start recharging new ones. Why? Well, then as we're doing these pulls, we can run into them, get the movement speed without having to cast a spell, or will get a global cooldown. So as you can see here, I've stacked them together, I use my Void Tendrils, I could use Mind Seer, but if I have to get away quickly, I don't really have to worry about casting these feathers. I can just move into them and get away quickly. Next up, the Shaman. The moment you reach level 10, you can choose your specialization. There's going to be 2 for DPS and a healer. As healer, you'll mainly be dungeon farming because you'll be doing awful if you're going solo questing. This is where Enhancement and Elemental is way better, as it's just focusing on doing a high amount of damage. In my opinion, Enhancement is the best because you don't have to wait for mana and there's always next to no downtime, compared to Elemental, where you will sometimes have to drink and you won't have instant heals later on like you will benefit from as Enhancement. However, it's not like Elemental is doing awful. In my opinion, they're pretty close to each other, also because we can now run and cast our Lightning Bolt at any given time. This makes this specialization so amazing in the beginning, because we are just running from one creature to another, and at the same time you're finishing off the other one with your Lightning Bolt. What I also like to do is to gather many enemies together and use my Thunderstorm. It is a long cooldown, but it's also pretty amazing for doing AoE damage at low level. Remember, it's not like you only have to use Lightning Bolt. You can also use your Primal Strike and Earth Shock whenever you get close to the enemies. For those of you with an Earlham weapon, I like to enchant mine with Power Torrent, as it increases my intellect for a short duration, but even though it is a short duration, you will also be doing a lot of additional spell damage. How about enhancement? Well, here you'll mainly be focusing on being in melee range, as most of your damage will be done when in melee. This is definitely also a very decent specialization, because even though you need to get close to them, you're always running from one creature to another, and you're doing so much damage that you're also taking them down in 1 to 2 seconds. So I guess it all depends on if you would like to be a spellcaster or a melee character. However, if you're leveling as enhancement, you can still use your lightning bolt while you're running and from range, so you can use this as you're moving to the next target. This makes this spec so much fun to play, and why I usually choose this. Also because I never have any downtime. On my weapons I like to use Mongoose, but as a low level character I also like Elemental Force, as it's proccing all the time and it's doing so much damage. Yeah, this is why I'm also able to one-shot most enemies. In a moment I will show my talent and glyph trees and also explain why I choose these, but first I would also like to highlight that if you're going to level a shaman and if you won't be in dungeons all the time, then questing is the best possible way to level, and therefore I would also recommend you to try out this amazing leveling guide. It's working in the pre-patch and of course also in Mist of Pandaria from level 1 to 90. There's a free version you can try out by using the link below this video, and there you can also get the full version. Alright, moving on to my talent tree. This is how it looks like, and now an explanation for each choice. Even though Astral Shift has a long cooldown, then whenever I'm dropping low, or if I need to do a huge pull, I can activate this to also reduce my damage taken by 6 seconds. Where the Stone Bulwark totem, it requires you to also be in range, so if you're just kiting or moving from one creature to another, you won't really benefit much from this totem. And the last option will require you to drop low before it will be useful. So why not choose a talent you can use whenever you like to, and this will also prevent you from ever reaching a low amount of health. At level 30 you can choose Windwalker totem. This is mainly for PvP or when you reach max level and you need to provide something useful for the raid. I mainly choose Earthgrab totem, one of the reasons being that it's rooting the enemies, so you can use this and get away. You can also use it for when you need to kite and stack the enemies together before you start doing AoE and cleave damage. Frozen Power is a passive where a Frost Shock now roots the enemy for 5 seconds. This is also good in PvP, but I don't like it that much in PvE when I need to kite but still do damage to the target, because it will now be rooted. Remember, if you need to get away from a sticky situation, it's usually not when you're just fighting one enemy anyway, therefore you would much rather like to root everything so you can also get away without dying. Because we're always moving a lot as enhancement and elemental, then I like Totemic Projection as it only has a 10-second cooldown. Being able to relocate our totems is absolutely insane, because it doesn't really require any mana compared to having to spawn all your totems again. The second option isn't really that great. First off, we haven't unlocked many totems at this level, and what I would also like to say is that once again, we're not staying at the same location for a long time, so you won't really benefit much from this talent. Being able to reset the cooldown of our totems is definitely not a bad talent, but then again it also has a 3 minutes cooldown, so you won't benefit much from this compared to Totemic Projection that you will benefit from at any given time. At level 60 we can choose Elemental Mastery, increasing our haste by 30% for 20 seconds. This is mainly for elemental shamans, or well, you're benefiting more from this, so it's not a bad talent if you're leveling as elemental. The second option will passively increase our spell haste by 5% and melee haste by 10%. This is not a huge amount, but you will also be able to cast the next nature spell instantly, so it's not a bad talent. I just prefer Echoes of the Elements as it's constantly proccing, and being able to double your healing or damage is going to be way better. Later in the video I will also compare the different specializations at level 60 so you can see Echoes of the Elements in action, and then later on level 85 as well. When we reach level 75 we can choose yet another talent, but all of these are mainly focusing on you doing damage to also be healing. So it's not really something that will help you a lot when you're leveling, but it will be useful if you're dungeon farming or when you reach max level. I usually choose Ancestral Guidance, as this is a nice cooldown you can activate and then start bursting to heal. But rushing streams are also good if you're just leveling in the open world and sometimes inviting another player, then both of you will benefit from your healing stream totem. What about my glyphs? I always go for Flame Shock no matter the specialization, as it provides healing when I apply my Flame Shock. Lightning Shield will always be active, so why not reduce your damage taken by 10% for 6 seconds. The last glyph I'm using is either Healing Storm or Spirit Walk, but this is only if I'm leveling as enhancement. As elemental, I swap this into Unstable Earth, so my Earthquake will now also apply a slow to all the targets affected by the damage. For my minor glyphs, I reduce the cooldown of my second Heartstone by 5 minutes. And there's yet another glyph for the very same spell. But what this does is that it will now take you to your capital's Earth Shrine. As a Horde player, it's equal to Orgrimmar, and as an Alliance, Storm City. This is so insane, because you can then change your Heartstone to your questing location. So when you need to go to your main city, you use this spell, and when you need to go back to your questing location, you will then be using your Heartstone. Your last minor glyph isn't that important. I usually choose this, but you can go for whatever you like. Next up, I'll compare the different specializations at level 60, starting with the enhancement Shaman. My kill speed is close to how it were when I showcased level 10, but now I'm just having way more survivability, and I can also easily pull more targets and start doing AoE or will cleave damage. What I like a lot about this specialization is that you never have any downtime, you're never low on mana, and you have the opportunity to also proc your Maelstrom weapons into converting this into healing, so instant heals allowing you to just go on and on. In my opinion, I find this such a fun leveling specialization when I'm in Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, and also Cataclysm content, because yeah, you're just constantly having something to do, and you never really have to worry about dying. So are you telling me we should just be leveling as enhancement? No, not at all. In Burning Crusade, elementals are also doing good. You have your Earthquake, you can easily stack the enemies together with your Earthbind totem, you have your Chain Lightning and instant Lava Burst procs. Yeah, this is not bad at all. What I like a lot about Elemental is that you constantly also have something to use, and now you will also be able to use your Lightning Bolt and sometimes an instant Lava Burst. And when you crit with your Lava Burst, which you always does if you have a Flame Strike on the enemy, well, then you're also almost one-shotting these. So once again, it basically depends on how you would like to level. Would you prefer to be in melee or most of the times in range as a spellcaster? And then again, if we are looking at the leveling speed, there isn't a huge difference, so you should just choose whatever you prefer or find the most fun. At level 85, elemental shamans are still performing good when you're just focusing on one target, and sometimes you can almost one-shot them if you're lucky with your procs. But if you're pulling many, you will actually have to once in a while also cast a healing spell, else you will end up dying if you're pulling many at the same time. When I'm pulling many, I don't feel like this is comfortable at all. At least not if we compare to just killing 1 or 2, where elementals are so strong and where you never really have to worry about dying. So if you're a person that just prefers to kill 1 or 2 at the same time, then I would most likely choose elemental, because having these procs, like you can see right here, are just fun, as you're basically one-shotting these enemies. How about enhancement in Mist of Pandaria? Well, single target wise, you don't have as big burst compared to elemental, but then again your damage isn't really bad, and like you can see here, I don't really have to worry about my health, as I have many different ways to always be at max health. But will it stay like this if I'm pulling way more targets? Well, let's see right here. To me, everything feels more safe, mainly because of Maelstrom weapon I can use for that instant heal, and at the same time I have so many different things to do cleave and AoE damage. I know the damage done is not as high compared to elemental, but it's constant. And if I activate all my different cooldowns, I'm also unkillable, able to pretty much also pull 10 enemies at the same time and probably stay above 50% health at all time. I honestly find it difficult to decide what is the best specialization to choose, either in Mist of Pandaria content or from level 10 and all the way up to max level, as both of these has advantages but also disadvantages. So what it comes down to should probably be what you would like to do at max level, So if you would like to play Elemental, then you should probably just level as Elemental so you're used to the different spells and rotations. Finally, it's time for me to cover the Warlock. In the beginning, you will of course only have your Shadow Bolt, but the moment you unlock Corruption, then this is such a great way to efficiently level a Warlock quickly to level 10, as you can apply your damage over time to all nearby targets, and then your Imp will simply just finish them off. I feel like this is a great way instead of just standing still and casting a Shadow Bolt on one target at a time. The moment you have stacked them together, you could then be using your Shadow Bolt. What about when we reach level 10? What specialization should you pick? Affliction will do damage with dots, but you only have 2 at level 10. Demonology, yeah, you don't have many spells at level 10, so I find this pretty awful in the beginning, where Destruction seems to be way better as you unlock many spells at low level and also conflagrate instantly at level 10, so you can do an instant spell cast. This recharges and you can have a total of 2 of these active at a time. The only downside is that you'll most likely also end up standing still quite often and casting your Incinerate, but it does a high amount of damage, which is why this is still the best specialization. If I didn't level up as Destruction at level 10, I would definitely choose Affliction, as this has also been buffed in Mist of Pandaria Classic, so now it's even better for leveling. As I reach a higher level, Affliction still seems pretty decent. As you can see right here, I'm honestly doing quite a decent amount of damage single target wise, and I'm not struggling at all with my health or dealing with these. But as I'm also reaching a higher level, Demonology seems to be becoming a lot better, because at low level we were also lacking a lot of important spells that makes Demonology so insane, as you can easily tank, kill 5 targets at the same time with your insane spell cleave and survivability. And now Demonology actually seems to be better compared to Affliction when leveling. So by the time I moved into Burning Crusade questing areas, I would most likely go to my trainer and respec into Demonology. But in my opinion, Destruction still seems to be the quickest way to level prior to reaching Mist of Pandaria zones. Basically because our Chaos Bolt can now also hit an additional target, and when you deal damage with this spell, you're pretty much also one-shotting the targets. This also makes this specialization very beginner friendly, because you don't have to press many different spells to be leveling up efficiently. Talking about leveling up efficiently, the best way to quickly reach level 90 is also by questing. And when I'm questing, I'm always following a leveling guide. The one I'm using right here, I will also leave in the description, where there will be a redirect link to where you can test it out for free, or even get the full version that works all the way up to max level. By using this link, you will also automatically be getting a discount. Next up, my talent trees. You can pick your first talent at level 15, and this is how my talent tree usually ends up looking like. Harvest Lives requires you to stand still, but it is a decent choice if you for example don't have many spells as your specialization at level 15. But I usually go with Soul Leech, so I'm always getting an Absorb Shield. Dark Regeneration at 2 minutes cooldown, but it is of course not bad at all. I mainly just like to go for Soul Leech for having a passive that always provides me something. Demonic Breath can be good for those of you who would like to pull many targets at the same time, but let's be honest, it doesn't really happen that often. Therefore, I don't really like this talent, even though it's a low cooldown. It could maybe be good if you plan to dungeon farm. Mortal Coil, a low cooldown and regening 15% of your maximum health. This is such a good choice, and usually my second pick. But what I prefer to go for is Shadow Fury, so I also have an instant AoE stun. Amazing if you accidentally pull too many targets and you need to make sure you get away. You can also stun, cast a Chaos Bolt, or maybe a Fear. Dark Bargain is something I don't really like. It's good for PvP, but when leveling up, I don't feel like it's benefiting you much. Where Pact only has a 1 minute cooldown and it's a huge absorb. Great for when you're for example also pulling many targets. The reason why I choose Soul Link is because it's a passive, so it's up all the time. I just gotta make sure I'm doing damage. And this is amazing when you combine it with the level 15 talent Soul Leech that also provides Absorb Shields. At level 60 you can choose Blood Horror, but I don't like this much. Yeah, it's good for PvP, or if you were just fighting one target at a time that were difficult to deal with. Burning Rush is way better, no cooldown, and you just sacrifice some health to increase your movement speed. Great for when you need to get quickly to the next enemy, if you need to kite, or simply just get away from a sticky situation. I don't like Unbound Will. I feel like this is mainly also just for PvP, especially because when you're fighting many creatures, you won't be CC'd anyway. Your level 75 choice all depends on your specialization. Sacrifice is great for leveling as destruction, as you'll now be dealing even more damage, but you won't be using any demons. Being able to summon a second demon for 20 seconds with a 2 minutes cooldown is something I would not recommend you to get. You don't benefit much from this. It's better to improve your demons, as this doesn't have a cooldown and is passively just increasing their damage by 20% and also giving them more powerful abilities. Sometimes I also choose Supremacy when I level as Destruction, when I'm basically fighting a difficult target where I'll need a pet to assist me. Next up, my glyphs. The first one here is a mandatory one to get, no matter your specialization, as it will benefit you every time you're killing a target, granting experience or honor. So if I were for example leveling as Destruction, I would regen 20% of my total health if I killed a target with Chaos Bolt. No matter my specialization, then I also like Glyph of Fear. Now it won't just be running around and maybe chain pulling more targets, instead it will be standing still at the location where it got feared. Glyph of Demon Training will also benefit everyone, as it will now improve your demons, no matter which of them you prefer to use. For minor glyphs, when I'm using my class mount, I will also be able to run on water, and this is great as there will definitely be different locations where you'll also be in water environments. This is why I'm also choosing Unending Breath, so my swim speed will be increased by 20% when I apply this buff to myself or someone else. Glyph of Eye of Kilrock is the absolute must-have. It is the best glyph in the game for sure. Or well, at least the moment you unlock your demonic circle, as you can now summon this guardian, get it to a specific location, and summon your demonic circle at that location. This is especially useful when you level in Mist of Pandaria zones where you can't fly yet, as it will help you save some travel time. Next up, I'll compare the different specializations when you start leveling up in Mist of Pandaria zones at level 85. Here I'm testing Demonology, and single target wise I'm doing damn awful. This is not a great specialization if you just plan to kill a target at a time. You would much rather like to pull more targets, as here you will benefit way more as you're doing insane cleave damage. So if you plan to level as Demo, you should also be pulling many targets at the same time. If this isn't your playstyle and you would much rather like to cast and maybe kill 1 or 2 at the same time, then you should be leveling as Destro. The amount of burst damage here is so fun, and you can almost one-shot one of those enemies. But you will be leveling quicker if you always make sure you're pulling 2 targets at the same time, as you'll be able to hit both of them with your Chaos Bolt and finish them off with your Soul Burn. By using your Soul Burn, you're generating more Burning Embers, so you can continue to use your Chaos Balls. How about spell cleaving or AoEing as Destro? Sadly, I don't really like it. Our damage is damn awful, and we're not doing great when it comes to dealing with many targets at the same time. So if you would like to do big pulls, well then I believe Destro isn't really the specialization for you. Is Affliction any better? Well, with all the buffs Blizzard has provided, Affliction are such a fun spec to level in Mist of Pandaria. You have your instant dodge applied to the target, and then you can just cast a Haunt. When you're about to finish one of these, you use your Drain Soul to get 4 new soul shards, so you can continue to proceed like this, where you're instantly applying all 3 dots. So when it comes to dealing with one specific target, well, then you will be a quick leveler. How about dealing with more than 4 targets at the same time? Well, the problem is that we can only instantly apply our dots to 4 targets, and then we're out of soul shards. Here it will then be important that you drain soul to get 4 new soul shards, so we can apply instant dots to the remaining targets. But because it also takes a lot of time to do this procedure, then you'll most likely also end up taking a lot of damage, and this is something that can be quite dangerous, and why I usually never pull more than 4 when I'm leveling as Affliction. What I like about Warlock is that all 3 specializations are doing so well between level 85 to 90, so you could choose whatever playstyle fits you the most. The only reason I wouldn't recommend you to level as Demonology is because at level 90 it seems like Affliction but also Destro are outperforming the damage in raids. Therefore it could be more beneficial to level as Affliction and Destro so you get used to the different spells and your rotations. I hope you enjoyed this Warlock leveling guide. If you would like to see more leveling guides, make sure to check out my channel. There you will also find a lot of other useful videos, gold making, tips and tricks, yeah, the list goes on and on. As always, thank you so much for watching and have an amazing day. Peace.